Hey guys, tonight we're going to explore a truth that has fascinated thinkers and lovers for centuries. Schopenhauer exposed the hidden patterns of desire, attraction, and human relationships, not to judge but to reveal currents that quietly shape the way we connect. What if the romantic stories we cherish, the fairy tales of devotion and perfect love, are only the surface of an ancient biological logic guiding our hearts and choices? We'll observe these forces with curiosity, learning to recognize the subtle dynamics that often go unnoticed, and see how they influence both our emotions and decisions. So, before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Picture the soft glow of a lamp nearby, the gentle hum of a fan blending with the quiet of your room, and shadows stretching slowly across the walls. Let this be your space of calm reflection. Drop a note in the comments. Tell me where you are and what hour it is where you live. You may realize that love, desire, and attraction are far more intricate than any story you've been told. This isn't meant to unsettle you, it's an invitation to clarity, helping you perceive your own heart with quiet insight, and to approach your connections with awareness rather than assumption. Now, dim the lights, perhaps turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into this evening's journey. From the very beginning, Schopenhauer observed love as more than a tender feeling or a poetic ideal. He described it as a biological instrument, a strategy woven into the very fabric of life. Love, according to his insight, functions as a mechanism to ensure survival, not merely to produce joy or companionship. It is a force that compels us toward reproduction, not out of conscious choice, but through instincts that have been honed over millennia. For women, this biological imperative often manifests in subtle preferences, decisions, and attractions that may appear entirely personal, but are deeply informed by evolutionary pressures. Imagine a quiet garden in the evening, the scent of flowers drifting through the air, each petal catching the last rays of the setting sun. Just as the petals open toward the light without thought, so too does desire orient itself toward qualities that promise survival and advantage. Schopenhauer noted that women, in particular, possess a keen attunement to these signals, often unconsciously assessing potential partners for strength, vitality, and resourcefulness. This is not about manipulation or calculation in a conscious sense. Rather, it is a natural tendency shaped by evolutionary necessity. Men, conversely, are often drawn into the narrative of romantic heroism, imagining that devotion, sacrifice, and grand gestures alone are sufficient to elicit attraction. They may spend months or years striving to prove worthiness through effort, generosity, or commitment, believing that love will reward persistence. Yet, as Schopenhauer observed, these very gestures, however noble, are filtered through the underlying biological criteria that govern attraction. Women are attuned, at a subtle level, to qualities that signify survival potential, qualities that are often invisible to conscious assessment but cannot be entirely overlooked. Consider the nuances of this dynamic. Physical presence, for instance, communicates more than appearance alone. Posture, energy, and confidence silently convey resilience. Social behavior reflects resource acquisition and problem-solving skills. Even in casual interactions, women may unconsciously register signals that indicate compatibility on a genetic and environmental level. Schopenhauer's insight was that attraction is rarely arbitrary. It is less about who is charming or kind in isolation and more about whether the person embodies traits historically advantageous for survival and offspring. It is crucial to understand that this biological logic does not diminish the authenticity of emotions. A woman's affection or connection is not fake. Rather, it operates simultaneously on multiple levels: conscious enjoyment, emotional resonance, and unconscious evolutionary assessment. When a woman feels drawn to someone, she may sense comfort, humor, or intellectual stimulation. Yet beneath this conscious awareness lies a subtle calculus of compatibility and advantage. Schopenhauer emphasized that these forces are constant, shaping the choices of men and women alike, whether or not they recognize them. Let us reflect for a moment on the concept of compatibility itself. It extends beyond mere superficial preferences. Compatibility encompasses physical health, cognitive ability, temperament, and resilience in the face of adversity. It also includes social positioning and potential for resource stability. These elements, while often unspoken, influence attraction in ways that feel instinctive rather than reasoned. A woman may find herself drawn to a man not because of a conscious checklist but because, deep within, her senses register qualities that historically increased the likelihood of survival for her and her potential offspring. The patterns Schopenhauer described remain relevant today, even if the context has changed. While society has evolved, and while romantic narratives encourage ideals of emotional purity, the biological currents he observed continue to flow beneath modern relationships. Women, whether consciously or unconsciously, navigate these currents every day. Understanding this does not reduce love to a cold algorithm. It illuminates the mechanisms behind why certain attractions feel inevitable, why some connections thrive while others falter. Awareness of this logic allows women to engage with relationships more deliberately, recognizing when desire aligns with genuine emotional resonance versus when it is a reflection of instinctive, evolutionary programming. In practical terms, this means that a woman can learn to discern the difference between surface-level charm and signals that indicate enduring compatibility. She may recognize patterns in attraction that reveal deeper truths about her own values and instincts. By understanding the biological underpinnings of desire, a woman gains the ability to participate consciously in her relationships, rather than being swept along by unconscious forces alone. Schopenhauer's observation is not a warning against love. It is an invitation to heighten self-awareness, to understanding that attraction and affection are complex phenomena interwoven with survival imperatives, emotional resonance, and personal choice. Consider the cognitive biases that play into this dynamic. Confirmation bias, for instance, can make a woman notice and amplify traits in a partner that seem compatible while overlooking subtle signals that may indicate misalignment. Similarly, projection may cause her to attribute qualities to someone that exist more in her imagination than in reality. Schopenhauer's insight encourages recognition of these patterns. By acknowledging the unconscious calculations inherent in attraction, a woman can navigate relationships with clarity, distinguishing instinctive draw from conscious desire. Another important dimension is the interplay between personal values and evolutionary signals. A woman may prize kindness, empathy, or shared vision, but these preferences do not negate the biological impulses guiding attraction. Instead, they exist alongside them, shaping a nuanced landscape where instinct and consciousness intersect. Schopenhauer's brilliance lay in illuminating that women, in this intricate dance, are not naive participants. They are highly attuned observers of subtle currents, blending instinctual evaluation with conscious judgment. It is worth noting that modern psychology has explored these phenomena in depth. Evolutionary psychology, attachment theory, and studies on mate selection all corroborate aspects of Schopenhauer's insights. While interpretations vary, the core idea remains compelling. Attraction operates on multiple layers, combining biological imperatives with social, emotional, and cognitive factors. Women, by recognizing these layers, can cultivate both self-awareness and agency, learning to approach relationships not as passive recipients of affection but as deliberate navigators of desire and connection. Imagine a quiet night, perhaps in your own room, the faint rustle of leaves outside, or the distant hum of a city at rest. Within this stillness, consider the subtle calculations that guide attraction. the unspoken signals, the instincts that steer attention, the resonance of energy and presence that feels almost magnetic. This awareness is not meant to provoke cynicism. It is meant to illuminate, to provide clarity. A woman who understands these currents can choose her engagements, appreciate her instincts, and cultivate connections that honor both her heart and her discernment. Schopenhauer reminds us that love is, at its foundation, a biological strategy, but that does not diminish the profound emotional experience it provides. Rather, it invites reflection. The next time you feel drawn toward someone, pause to consider the layers at work. Is this attraction arising from genuine emotional connection, or is it being subtly guided by unconscious evolutionary signals? By observing without judgment, a woman gains insight into her own desires, allowing her to navigate relationships with intentionality, clarity, and confidence. Ultimately, the biological logic of love is not a cage, it is a map. It reveals the currents that have shaped human connection for millennia, showing women where instinct meets emotion, and where conscious choice intersects with unconscious calculation. Recognizing these forces empowers a woman to participate fully in her relationships, not blindly but with awareness, discernment, and respect for both her heart and her instincts. In this clarity, she discovers not only the hidden patterns of attraction but also a deeper understanding of herself, her values, and the nature of the connections she chooses to cultivate. Love, as Schopenhauer illuminated, is at once a profound emotional experience and a biological imperative. By acknowledging both dimensions, a woman can move beyond romantic illusions and navigate relationships with wisdom, presence, and agency. She can see the subtle mechanisms beneath desire, appreciate the interplay of instinct and emotion, and make choices that honor both her biological heritage and her conscious self. In doing so, she steps into a more empowered, conscious engagement with love, attraction, and the human heart. In the quiet of the evening, as shadows stretch across your room and the gentle hum of a fan provides a soft backdrop, it's worth pausing to consider a force that has guided human behavior for millennia: the instinct of survival choice. This is not merely a concept for philosophers to debate. It is a principle that quietly shapes decisions, relationships, and the subtle calculations that occur in our hearts without our conscious awareness. Schopenhauer observed that women in particular are guided by deeply ingrained evolutionary mechanisms that influence whom they choose, whom they trust, and whom they invest their emotional energy in. From the very earliest stages of human society, survival depended on discernment. It was never enough to be drawn to someone for their charm alone. A partner's capacity to provide safety, stability, and resources was critical, not as a conscious metric, but as an instinctual gauge embedded in the psyche. For women, this ancient program manifests as a sensitivity to social positioning, resource availability, and the subtle markers of competence and resilience. Schopenhauer referred to this as part of the hidden machinery of attraction, an invisible yet persistent current that directs attention toward qualities that historically increased the likelihood of survival. Imagine a small village in prehistory, where each member's choices could influence the well-being of the entire community. A woman's selection of a partner was not arbitrary. It was informed by observations of strength, intelligence, and social influence. Even small details, how a man interacted with others, how he responded to conflict, how he provided for his family, carried weight beyond mere appearances. These behaviors were signals, subtle yet telling, of a capacity to navigate the uncertainties of life. While the world has changed, the psychological echoes of these mechanisms remain. In modern life, this instinct often manifests in ways that may feel less obvious. Women may notice patterns in decision-making, leadership, and problem-solving. They may feel drawn to individuals who demonstrate competence and calm under pressure or who exhibit an understated confidence in navigating complex social landscapes. These attractions are not mere coincidences or superficial preferences. They are echoes of evolutionary pressures that once determined survival. Schopenhauer's insight illuminates this dynamic. What appears as personal choice is often intertwined with ancient programming, guiding attention toward stability, security, and potential long-term advantage. Yet, the instinctive survival choice is not rigid. It interacts with consciousness, values, and personal growth. Awareness of these impulses allows women to navigate relationships and life decisions with intentionality rather than unexamined reaction. Recognizing that attraction and trust are influenced by ancient algorithms does not diminish the authenticity of feelings. It enhances discernment. By observing patterns without judgment, women can align instincts with conscious priorities, fostering empowerment rather than passivity. Consider the subtle signs of this instinct in everyday life. A woman may sense security in a partner who demonstrates resourcefulness under stress, who communicates effectively, or who maintains composure in challenging circumstances. She may also unconsciously register social status, reputation, or the ability to cultivate meaningful networks. These are not superficial judgments. They are indicators deeply embedded in survival logic, guiding attention toward qualities historically associated with protection, provision, and stability. Schopenhauer's philosophy emphasizes that these signals are persistent, operating below the level of conscious thought, yet profoundly influencing emotional resonance and attraction. It is equally important to recognize that survival choice extends beyond romantic selection. Women employ this instinct in social alliances, professional networks, and even in daily decision-making. The evaluation of risk, assessment of reliability, and perception of competence are all filtered through an evolved sensitivity to stability and advantage. In understanding this, women gain a framework for interpreting their own responses. Why certain individuals inspire trust, why particular environments feel safer, and why some opportunities feel compelling while others are instinctively avoided. Modern psychology has explored similar dynamics through attachment theory and evolutionary models. Secure attachment, for instance, often correlates with heightened awareness of competence and reliability in potential partners. Women may feel drawn to individuals who demonstrate consistent care, emotional regulation, and practical problem solving, all qualities that historically signaled long-term viability. While culture and society overlay these instincts with additional expectations, the core drive remains rooted in survival logic, an internal compass finely tuned to assess safety, security, and social advantage. Schopenhauer's observations also illuminate the tension that arises when conscious desires and instinctual drives diverge. A woman may find herself drawn to traits that seem exciting or unconventional, yet her instinctive evaluations may register subtle misalignments, hesitations, intuitions, or quiet doubts. These internal signals are not irrational. They are the echoes of an ancient calculus that once ensured survival. Understanding this allows a woman to differentiate between fleeting attraction and deeper resonance, between emotional impulse and instinctual insight. Beyond attraction, survival choice informs personal empowerment. Recognizing the patterns by which instinct operates enables women to navigate their own lives with agency. By observing which situations, environments, or individuals support stability and growth, women can make decisions that align with both instinct and conscious intention. Schopenhauer's insights highlight that empowerment is not about rejecting instinct but about integrating it with deliberate awareness, allowing choice to be informed, not dictated, by ancient forces. Reflection on these patterns also encourages self-trust. When a woman notices an internal signal, a hesitation, a feeling of safety, or a sense of alignment, she learns to respect the subtle calculus that her psyche is performing. This is not about manipulation or cynicism. It is about honoring the evolved wisdom within, understanding that instincts are designed to guide toward well-being, resilience, and long-term flourishing. Schopenhauer emphasized that these currents are always present, shaping decisions in ways both visible and hidden, yet they can be observed, interpreted, and consciously directed. Consider, for example, the modern workplace. Women navigate choices regarding mentorship, partnerships, and collaboration through both conscious assessment and instinctive evaluation. Which colleague can be relied upon? Who demonstrates competence under pressure? Which environments feel safe for vulnerability and growth? These assessments, often occurring unconsciously, reflect the same principles Schopenhauer described in matters of attraction. The mind constantly evaluates alignment, resilience, and potential benefit, even in contexts far removed from reproduction or romance. The power of awareness lies in recognizing these instincts without being dominated by them. Women can cultivate discernment, aligning instinct with conscious values. A woman may choose a partner or a path not solely because of surface appeal but because she integrates intuitive assessments with reflective judgment. Schopenhauer's philosophy encourages observation, not judgment, awareness of underlying patterns without succumbing to fatalism. The objective is empowerment, to navigate life with clarity, understanding both the unconscious forces at play and the conscious priorities that guide personal fulfillment. Social pressures and romantic myths can obscure this awareness. Cultural narratives often emphasize spontaneity, passion, or idealized notions of love, which can distract from the subtle currents that instinctually guide decisions. Schopenhauer's insights cut through these illusions, revealing the mechanisms beneath attraction and preference. By acknowledging the instinct of survival choice, women can reclaim agency, understanding that attraction, trust, and selection are informed by both evolution and conscious intention. It is also valuable to note the intersection of instinct and emotional intelligence. The ability to perceive subtle cues, tone of voice, body language, consistency of action, is an extension of survival programming. Women often excel at detecting reliability, sincerity, and competence, using these cues to navigate both personal and professional relationships. Schopenhauer would argue that this acuity is not accidental but a reflection of deep evolutionary design, enabling discernment in a complex and uncertain world. Awareness of survival instincts does not lead to cynicism. Rather, it cultivates a grounded perspective. Women who understand these patterns can approach relationships and decisions with both intuition and insight. They can discern between appearances and substance, between immediate allure and enduring compatibility. Schopenhauer's observations invite reflection. By seeing the unconscious logic of selection, women gain clarity, confidence, and the ability to act intentionally in alignment with both instinct and conscious desire. Finally, recognizing the instinct of survival choice empowers women to shape their own path. Rather than being swept along by unconscious currents, a woman can make decisions informed by both intuition and reflection. She can assess potential partners, friendships, and life opportunities with awareness of the ancient principles at play. This synthesis of instinct and consciousness fosters resilience, self-trust, and a sense of agency that extends far beyond romantic selection. It allows a woman to engage with life actively, not passively, cultivating security, empowerment, and fulfillment in every decision she makes. In essence, the ancient mechanisms that guide survival choice are not relics to be ignored. They are tools to be understood and harnessed. Schopenhauer's philosophy illuminates these forces, revealing that women have always been attuned to subtleties of power, competence, and stability. By observing these instincts, integrating them with conscious judgment, and respecting the wisdom embedded within, women can navigate life with clarity, purpose, and empowerment, moving through relationships, challenges, and opportunities with a deep understanding of both the forces within and the realities of the world around them. In the stillness of a quiet room, when the world outside has slowed and shadows stretch across walls, there exists an invisible battlefield. It is not marked by swords or banners, but by subtler forces, currents of feeling, tides of instinct, and the unspoken influence that emotion wields over reality. Schopenhauer observed, with characteristic acuity, that women are seldom guided solely by reason. Instead, they are often led by the intricate dance of instinct and sentiment. He noted that this was not a weakness, but a profound capacity, a form of subtle influence that can shape events, choices, and relationships with astonishing precision. Imagine a gentle breeze stirring the curtains, carrying the faint scent of jasmine into the room. In this quiet, consider how a single glance, a word spoken softly, or a change in tone can alter the direction of a conversation, a decision, or even a day. Emotion in this sense is a force as real as gravity, invisible yet capable of moving entire worlds. Women, through an acute attunement to their own feelings and those of others, can navigate this invisible landscape with an instinctive understanding that is both ancient and enduring. Schopenhauer remarked that the emotional currents flowing through a woman's mind often operate beyond conscious reasoning. Where logic might falter or struggle to assess complex social dynamics, emotion moves fluidly, sensing opportunity, risk, and alignment with remarkable subtlety. This does not imply manipulation in a malicious sense. Rather, it reflects an evolved capacity to understand, anticipate, and influence human behavior. The emotional intelligence that arises from this attunement is a form of power, quietly shaping interactions, decisions, and the perception of reality itself. Consider, for example, the way a woman might respond to tension in a room. She may feel instinctively when an argument is about to escalate, or when a conversation requires gentle guidance. Her intuition about the emotional currents around her allows her to adjust tone, posture, or expression, subtly steering outcomes. This capacity is rarely formalized in manuals or conscious teachings. It is a natural aptitude, honed by both evolution and lived experience. Schopenhauer recognized it as a mechanism that confers agency, enabling women to exert influence even in contexts where overt power is limited. At the heart of this capability lies the interplay between self-awareness and observation. A woman who understands her own emotions can use them strategically, amplifying strengths and mitigating vulnerabilities. She can recognize when anger, frustration, or vulnerability might inadvertently shape outcomes, and when they can be harnessed as tools of clarity, persuasion, or influence. This is what Schopenhauer meant by emotion as an instrument. It is neither inherently good nor bad, but profoundly effective when applied with consciousness. Picture a dimly lit study, the quiet ticking of a clock marking the passage of time, as a woman engages with a challenging conversation. She senses the unspoken tensions, the subtle hesitations, the undercurrents of uncertainty in others. By adjusting her own emotional expression, her tone, cadence, or posture, she can guide the interaction toward resolution, understanding, or mutual alignment. Emotion becomes a language in itself, a medium of influence that transcends words and appeals directly to perception and instinct. This emotional influence is closely linked to social intelligence. Women often excel at perceiving micro-expressions, tonal shifts, and behavioral nuances that might escape conscious notice. Schopenhauer described this sensitivity as a kind of evolutionary attunement, designed to navigate complex social environments where survival and advantage were intertwined with alliance, negotiation, and subtle persuasion. Recognizing this capacity allows women to employ emotion consciously rather than being passively swept along by its currents. It is important to note that the emotional landscape is rarely simple. Feelings of attraction, irritation, empathy, or caution can coexist, creating complex internal states that interact with external realities. Schopenhauer highlighted that women often integrate these layers instinctively, generating responses that reflect both survival imperatives and personal values. Awareness of these layers provides the possibility of intentional influence. A woman can observe how her emotions interact with the environment, and choose how to express, modulate, or restrain them in pursuit of desired outcomes. Cognitive psychology and behavioral studies support these observations. Emotional intelligence, the ability to recognize, interpret, and respond to one's own emotions and those of others, is linked to decision-making effectiveness, conflict resolution, and social influence. Women often demonstrate remarkable proficiency in these areas, translating instinctive perception into tangible impact on interactions, relationships, and the broader social environment. Schopenhauer's insights prefigure much of this research, noting that emotion is not a liability but a tool, a subtle lever that shapes reality in ways that logic alone cannot. The invisible front line of emotion is also a space of negotiation and strategy. Women may find themselves navigating conflicting impulses: empathy versus assertiveness, vulnerability versus strength, openness versus caution. Each choice carries consequences, and each expression of feeling conveys information that can be interpreted by others, consciously or unconsciously. Schopenhauer observed that women are uniquely positioned to wield this influence, often without overt force, because the social and emotional acuity embedded within them allows subtle control over outcomes. Consider an example in interpersonal relationships. A conversation about commitment, expectations, or boundaries is rarely dictated by words alone. Tone, timing, expression, and emotional resonance carry as much weight as the content itself. Women attuned to these cues can guide discussions, subtly shaping decisions, perceptions, and agreements. This is not coercion. It is the natural application of insight into emotional dynamics, a capacity that is both adaptive and empowering. Yet, mastery of this invisible force requires self-awareness. Emotions that are unexamined or unconscious can just as easily mislead or destabilize. A fleeting irritation or unprocessed anxiety can ripple outward, affecting decisions and interactions in unintended ways. Schopenhauer's counsel suggests reflection, understanding the forces at play within one's emotional landscape, acknowledging their influence, and choosing how to channel them with intention. By doing so, women can transform raw feeling into conscious agency, shaping reality without being unduly driven by instinct alone. The societal perception of emotion often misconstrues this capacity. Women's feelings are sometimes labeled as irrational, impulsive, or manipulative, when in fact they reflect acute perception, complex processing, and adaptive response. Schopenhauer's observations help reframe this. Emotional attunement is a form of intelligence, a skill that can be refined, understood, and applied deliberately. Recognizing this empowers women to navigate both personal and professional contexts with clarity, leveraging insight rather than being subject to it. Emotional strategy is not confined to negotiation or persuasion. It extends to self-regulation and personal growth. By understanding emotional patterns, a woman can anticipate triggers, manage stress, and cultivate resilience. Schopenhauer emphasized that emotion is a tool for navigating reality, and when applied consciously, it can guide choices, protect well-being, and amplify personal influence. This dual capacity, awareness of others' reactions and regulation of one's own responses, creates a powerful synergy, enabling effective participation in complex social landscapes. Even subtle gestures can carry profound weight. A smile, a pause, a shift in posture, or a carefully timed silence can communicate as effectively as spoken words. Women, often attuned to these microdynamics, can shape perception and interaction with precision. Schopenhauer's insight highlights that this is not trivial. It is a mechanism of influence, one that operates on the invisible front line where emotion intersects with social reality. Modern psychology echoes this principle in research on affective influence. Individuals who can perceive and modulate emotional signals achieve greater outcomes in leadership, collaboration, and conflict resolution. Women's historical and evolutionary experiences have honed these capacities, integrating intuition, observation, and adaptive response. Schopenhauer's work serves as a reminder that this skill is not incidental but fundamental, offering both insight and opportunity for empowerment. Reflection is essential. As a woman observes her own emotional landscape, the rise of frustration, the swell of empathy, the subtle pull of desire, she can choose whether to act impulsively or strategically. She can recognize patterns, understand the underlying motivations of others, and decide how to engage with these forces. This conscious application transforms emotion from an uncontrollable tide into a navigable channel, one that shapes reality with deliberate effect. It is also important to balance power with authenticity. Schopenhauer's observations do not advocate suppression or performance. Rather, they highlight the potential inherent in emotional attunement. Women can remain authentic while being aware of influence, expressing feeling while guiding outcomes, and embracing empathy while maintaining discernment. This synthesis allows for relational integrity, self-respect, and strategic insight. Finally, the invisible front line of emotion invites contemplation. How often do feelings shape decisions without conscious recognition? How many moments of tension, attraction, or connection are quietly governed by instinctive perception and subtle influence? By observing, reflecting, and applying insight, women can transform emotional currents into instruments of clarity, empowerment, and presence. Schopenhauer's legacy reminds us that emotion is a sophisticated tool, a form of agency, and a vehicle for conscious action. By mastering this internal landscape, a woman learns not only to navigate social reality but also to understand herself. She can distinguish between fleeting impulses and enduring priorities, between unexamined reactions and deliberate influence. This mastery fosters confidence, autonomy, and a nuanced understanding of relationships and human behavior. The invisible front line is not a battleground of conflict, but a domain of insight, subtle power, and deliberate choice. A space where emotion becomes a compass rather than a constraint. In the gentle hush of night, as your room holds the faint scent of lingering day and the fan hums softly in the background, consider the quiet ways society shapes the paths of our hearts. From a young age, the concept of being good is woven into the fabric of a woman's development. Subtle, persistent, and often invisible. Schopenhauer observed with a sharp clarity that women often carry within them the weight of societal expectation, and that this weight can transform the natural vivacity of youth, innocence, curiosity, and spontaneity into what we call obedience, compliance, or being good. It is not inherently wrong to seek harmony or to cultivate empathy, yet the coercive pressure to suppress authentic impulses can quietly erode the self. Imagine a young girl, her hands messy with paint, her laughter ringing freely across a sunlit room. She experiments, she questions, she moves with curiosity and wonder. Yet, around her are whispers and gentle corrections: be careful, don't make trouble, act like a lady. Each phrase, seemingly benign, carries the weight of expectation, a subtle instruction to contain the self in service of what others deem acceptable. Schopenhauer noted that these early pressures shape not only behavior but perception, creating a dynamic where social approval is equated with virtue, and self-expression is cautiously edited for compliance. As women grow, this transformation becomes more structured, internalized, and complex. The vivacity of youth, the freedom to act without calculated thought, is gradually replaced by a careful calculation of others' responses. Emotions are moderated, desires concealed, and impulses weighed against the subtle ledger of approval and acceptability. Schopenhauer's critique highlights that this is not simply a matter of social etiquette. It is a psychological conditioning that can obscure genuine preference and suppress authentic selfhood. The result is a delicate tension, the drive to please, to align with expectations, and to avoid disruption, often at the expense of internal alignment and personal truth. Consider the subtle mechanisms at play. A woman may find herself in professional or personal contexts continually negotiating between authenticity and approval. Choices are filtered through the lens of perceived acceptability. Will this make others uncomfortable? Will this reflect poorly on me? Am I being too bold, too soft, too visible, too quiet? Each decision, each nuance of behavior, is quietly influenced by the residue of socialized goodness, an internalized metric designed to ensure belonging and mitigate conflict. Schopenhauer's insight reveals that these pressures are neither superficial nor accidental. They are deeply embedded strategies of social survival, shaping decisions, relationships, and the contours of the self. Yet, the cost of this internalization is often hidden from view. Women may experience a quiet dissatisfaction, a sense that life feels constrained, even when all external markers of success or compliance are present. The natural impulses of curiosity, assertiveness, or exploration may be curtailed. Laughter may be tempered, risk-taking subdued. Schopenhauer observed that this suppression of authentic vitality is not a reflection of moral failing, but a structural outcome of the pressures to conform, to be good, and to align with expectations that often conflict with the self's natural inclinations. To dissolve the grip of this imposed goodness is to reclaim the self, not through rebellion or chaos, but through conscious recognition and reflection. Women can begin to observe the subtle ways that their choices, emotions, and behaviors have been conditioned by the expectations of others. They can distinguish between impulses that arise from authentic desire and those that are the product of internalized constraint. By cultivating this awareness, a woman can begin to disentangle the threads of social pressure from the fibers of personal truth. Imagine sitting in a softly lit room, a warm cup of tea in hand, listening to the distant hum of a city that sleeps uneasily while your mind traverses the landscape of memory and reflection. You notice patterns, the moments when your actions were dictated by fear of judgment, when your voice was softened, or when a laugh was stifled. Recognition is the first step toward liberation. Schopenhauer's philosophy does not call for rash rejection of society or responsibility. Rather, it encourages observation, understanding, and deliberate choice. By seeing the subtle currents of imposed goodness, women gain the clarity needed to navigate life with intention, not compulsion. This awareness opens a path to true maturity. Mature selfhood is not compliance, it is integration. It is the ability to honor innate curiosity, emotional depth, and spontaneous joy while navigating social and relational complexities with discernment. Schopenhauer's critique emphasizes that maturity arises not from the suppression of the self, but from the conscious coordination of instinct, desire, and reflection. A woman who achieves this synthesis embodies both agency and wisdom. She can engage with the world authentically, without being constrained by the invisible chains of externally imposed expectations. Consider how this plays out in relational dynamics. Many women, conditioned to anticipate the desires and reactions of others, may unconsciously structure their behavior to minimize conflict, please partners, or align with social scripts. While this may yield temporary approval, it often comes at the cost of personal alignment and satisfaction. By recognizing the historical and psychological underpinnings of this goodness, women can choose when compliance serves them and when it undermines their autonomy. Schopenhauer's lens invites a delicate balance. awareness without guilt, discernment without shame. In professional context, similar patterns emerge. A woman may downplay ambition to avoid envy, temper assertiveness to maintain likability, or moderate creative risk-taking to conform to expectation. Each instance is a subtle echo of the internalized instruction to be good. Schopenhauer's perspective reframes this not as failure but as the natural result of an evolved sensitivity to social context. The challenge then is to cultivate discernment, to navigate professional and personal spheres with both strategic awareness and authentic expression, reclaiming agency that has been quietly ceded to external pressures. One practical approach to dissolving these constraints is reflective journaling. By documenting decisions, impulses, and moments of hesitation, women can trace patterns of compliance versus authenticity. Over time, these reflections reveal the contours of social conditioning, illuminating where external expectation has subtly eclipsed internal preference. Schopenhauer would argue that insight arises from observation. Understanding the forces that guide behavior allows for intentional adjustment and self-directed growth. Equally important is the cultivation of selective disengagement. Not every expectation demands attention or alignment. Schopenhauer's philosophy encourages discernment, the ability to choose which pressures to integrate and which to release. By consciously prioritizing values, needs, and authentic impulses, women reclaim the capacity to act from self-determined principles rather than automatic compliance. This process is not linear. It requires patience, reflection, and courage to confront the subtle internalized judgments that have guided behavior for years. The dissolution of imposed goodness also involves rethinking vulnerability. Where compliance often masks authentic feeling, acknowledging and expressing true emotions, anger, joy, curiosity, or desire, becomes an act of empowerment. Schopenhauer emphasizes that self-awareness allows emotion and instinct to be integrated into decision-making consciously. Vulnerability ceases to be a liability. It becomes a conduit for authentic engagement, a tool for navigating complex relational landscapes with clarity and confidence. As this integration deepens, a woman discovers a rhythm between internal freedom and external responsibility. She can respond to social cues without being dominated by them, negotiate relationships without compromising the self, and cultivate authority in her own life without suppressing natural impulses. Schopenhauer's insights remind us that the self is not lost to expectation. It is refined and empowered when observed and engaged consciously. The dissolution of being good is therefore not an abandonment of virtue but an awakening to authentic moral and personal agency. Finally, consider the subtle beauty of reclaiming selfhood. It manifests in moments as small as laughter unrestrained, curiosity pursued without hesitation, or boundaries asserted with quiet confidence. It is reflected in professional decisions made with integrity, friendships maintained with clarity, and intimate relationships navigated with intentionality. Schopenhauer's philosophy underscores that true maturity is an active process. It is the conscious alignment of instinct, desire, and reason, allowing the self to flourish within and beyond the constraints of social expectation. Through this lens, being good transforms from a limiting injunction into a choice, a principle to engage when it aligns with authenticity, and to release when it suppresses it. Women who embrace this conscious discernment step into a form of self-mastery, cultivating autonomy, wisdom, and resilience. Schopenhauer's critique, far from cynical, becomes a guide to observe, to reflect, and to navigate the invisible expectations that have long shaped the trajectory of the self, ultimately reclaiming the vitality, joy, and agency that are the hallmarks of authentic maturity. In the quiet stillness of a late evening, when the faint light from a street lamp spills softly through a window and the rhythmic hum of a fan lulls the world into gentle obscurity, Consider the forces that govern attraction, forces subtler than charm, deeper than mere appearance, and more enduring than transient gestures of kindness. Schopenhauer, with his unflinching observation of human nature, noted that women are not drawn primarily to the good or the compliant. Instead, attraction is fundamentally rooted in an unconscious recognition of strength, presence, and autonomy. This strength may manifest in intellect, confidence, composure, or decisiveness, yet it always conveys an internal integrity that cannot be feigned for long. Picture a woman in a softly lit room, her gaze calm but alert, noticing the energy of those around her. She is aware, perhaps intuitively, of the distinction between those who act from authenticity and those who perform for approval. Schopenhauer's insight pierces the layers of social misconception. Attempts to win affection solely through acts of service, flattery, or compliance rarely resonate deeply. Women, he observed, are attuned to the subtle signals of internal power, the quiet command of presence, the consistency of character, and the capacity for self-determination. These qualities convey a reliability and gravitas far beyond any superficial display. Consider how society often misleads men into the pleasing trap. From early lessons about chivalry to cultural scripts about heroism and courtship, men are taught that their value is proven by their service to others, particularly women. While acts of kindness are virtuous, Schopenhauer recognized that they alone rarely cultivate lasting attraction. Beneath gestures of generosity or sacrifice lies a critical, often unconscious evaluation. Does this individual demonstrate a life directed by internal principles, or are they merely reactive to the desires of others? Women, attuned to this distinction, often perceive power not as dominance, but as self-governed coherence, the ability to act from conviction rather than compulsion. This understanding reframes the narrative of attraction. Strength is not coercive, it is a silent authority, a confidence in one's own alignment with values, goals, and desires. It is expressed in measured speech, in deliberate action, and in the ability to maintain composure amid uncertainty. Women are drawn to these traits because they signal reliability, competence, and resilience, qualities that have been evolutionarily advantageous for navigating complex social landscapes and ensuring stability in partnership and alliance. Schopenhauer's observation highlights that attraction is less about superficial charm and more about perceiving the unshakable center of a person's character. Imagine observing a scene in a dimly lit cafe. A conversation unfolds, gestures are exchanged, subtle expressions pass across faces. Some participants bend instinctively to please, mirroring words, nodding excessively, laughing at every joke. Others, however, speak with calm clarity, their gestures measured, their attention deliberate. Without overt assertion, the latter convey presence, independence, and inner authority. Schopenhauer's philosophy suggests that women register this distinction on a subconscious level, responding not to performative service but to the resonance of authenticity and self-directed power. Attraction grounded in strength has profound implications for relational dynamics. Women, in recognizing power as the true magnet, often avoid being swayed by superficial efforts of appeasement. This does not render kindness or attentiveness irrelevant, rather it contextualizes them. Service or generosity, when arising from internal alignment rather than a desperate desire for approval, amplifies attraction. Conversely, excessive pleasing in absence of internal integrity may appear hollow, prompting disengagement. Schopenhauer observed that this principle is consistent across time and culture. Authentic strength is inherently compelling. From the perspective of self-development, this insight invites women to cultivate discernment in their perception of power. The signals of strength are subtle, poise under pressure, consistency between word and action, resilience in the face of adversity, and the capacity for self-governed decision-making. Awareness of these markers allows women to differentiate between transient charm and enduring presence, fostering relationships rooted in recognition of true internal authority rather than performative compliance. Moreover, Schopenhauer's observations serve as a call to self-mastery. Women, by understanding the mechanics of attraction and the role of power, are empowered to cultivate their own inner authority. Authenticity and autonomy become both magnet and shield, drawing connections that resonate with truth while naturally repelling those seeking mere compliance or superficial gratification. This perspective reframes relational engagement. Attraction is not a game of performance, but an alignment of mutually recognized strength and self-determination. The cultivation of inner strength is not limited to visible achievement. It extends to emotional and cognitive mastery. A woman aware of her emotional landscape, her values, and her priorities demonstrates an integrity that cannot be mimicked. She is attuned to subtle manipulations, to performative gestures, and to signals that betray inauthentic intent. Schopenhauer's lens suggests that this awareness is not cynicism but refinement, a recognition that power, when anchored in self-knowledge and presence, creates the conditions for meaningful connection. Imagine a moment of tension in conversation. One party seeks approval, another asserts subtly but consistently. The woman observing discerns authenticity in the steady alignment of self-expression with internal principles. She senses when gestures are genuine and when they are designed solely to elicit compliance. Schopenhauer noted that this sensitivity is not manipulative in nature. It is the result of evolved attunement to behavioral patterns, a faculty that enables informed, intentional engagement with the social environment. This principle also illuminates why women often disengage from those whose efforts are excessive yet unanchored. Acts of generosity, compliments, or attention, when decoupled from self-determined alignment, may fail to inspire genuine connection. Schopenhauer's insight challenges conventional notions of courtship. Attraction is not about quantity of effort but quality of presence. Women instinctively perceive coherence, and it is this coherence, this integration of intention, action, and character, that commands enduring attention. Empowerment for women, then, is inseparable from recognition of this principle. By valuing strength over performative kindness, they recalibrate relational dynamics, setting standards that reflect awareness rather than acquiescence. Schopenhauer's philosophy encourages observation and reflection, to recognize patterns, discern authenticity, and engage with others in ways that honor both self and other. This conscious engagement transforms relational interaction from a passive response to an intentional practice of presence and discernment. At the core, this law of attraction underscores autonomy. Women who understand the magnetic force of internal power are less likely to be swayed by superficial gestures and more attuned to the subtle, enduring markers of integrity. They learn to navigate relationships with clarity, identifying partners who are aligned in self-governance, reliability, and inner strength. Schopenhauer's observation is not a prescription for judgment, but a guide to awareness, revealing the unconscious currents that shape relational perception. In practical terms, this awareness manifests in everyday choices. Conversations are approached with discernment, attentiveness is calibrated to sincerity, and engagement is guided by recognition of authentic presence. Women become architects of relational dynamics, not through coercion or manipulation, but through perceptive alignment with those whose actions reflect genuine internal authority. Schopenhauer's insights illuminate that attraction at its deepest level is a recognition of coherence and strength, a resonance that transcends superficial display. Furthermore, embracing this understanding liberates women from the burden of seeking to please. When attraction is rooted in internal strength rather than performance, the compulsion to conform, appease, or manage perceptions diminishes. Women can engage fully from a place of authenticity, confident that their presence, boundaries, and choices communicate more powerfully than any performative effort. Schopenhauer's reflections suggest that this liberation is both evolutionary and psychological. It aligns with innate perception while fostering agency and self-determination. The cultivation of personal strength, then, is dual in nature. It is both internal and relational. Internally, it involves self-knowledge, resilience, and the alignment of actions with principles. Relationally, it is expressed through presence, measured engagement, and perceptive understanding of others' authenticity. Schopenhauer observed that this synergy of inner integrity and outward resonance is magnetic, drawing meaningful connection while naturally repelling superficial or performative engagement. As this awareness deepens, women develop an intuitive sense of relational dynamics. They perceive subtle cues of alignment, inconsistency, or coherence. They recognize that true attraction is rarely instantaneous, often emerging from the quiet consistency of presence, confidence, and self-governed action. Schopenhauer's lens offers clarity. Strength is compelling not because it dominates, but because it signals stability, competence, and the capacity to navigate complexity. Finally, this principle encourages reflection on the cultivation of independence and self-reliance. Attraction rooted in internal power is inseparable from personal sovereignty. Women who embrace this understanding align not only relational engagement but also life priorities, values, and self-expression with principles of autonomy and authenticity. Schopenhauer's observations guide them toward a state where connection is chosen, resonance is recognized, and attraction flows naturally from the radiance of self-directed strength. By embracing the true law of attraction, women step beyond the confines of performative approval. They cultivate presence, integrity, and coherence. They recognize power as the magnet it is, and they disengage from the compulsion to please at the expense of self. Schopenhauer's insight, far from cynical, becomes liberating. Attraction is not a game of compliance, but a mirror of internal authority, a resonance that honors authenticity, and a reflection of the enduring power of a self-governed heart. Hey, in the quiet moments when the world outside softens into night and the gentle hum of a fan blends with distant city sounds, consider the paradox of possession, a subtle yet pervasive force in human emotion and desire. Schopenhauer observed that the act of possessing, of conquering or gaining what one desires, carries an inherent tragedy. The very pleasure of attainment is fleeting, often dissipating as the biological impulse that drove desire shifts toward new targets. This is not a moral failing. It is a fundamental feature of human nature, deeply embedded in our evolutionary programming. Imagine the glow of a warm lamp casting long shadows across a room. A relationship, a connection once sought with fervent attention, now sits quietly in the mind. The initial exhilaration of closeness, the thrill of mutual discovery, gradually softens. Schopenhauer would argue that this is a natural rhythm, a biological inevitability. The organism achieves and the imperative of desire shifts, subtly and often unconsciously, toward renewal, novelty, or reproductive advantage. Women, attuned to relational dynamics, may witness this pattern and, consciously or not, experience the disappointment of shifting emotional currents. Consider the mechanisms underlying this phenomenon. Attraction, investment, and emotional intensity are not static. They are processes, deeply intertwined with evolutionary imperatives. Schopenhauer suggested that once the biological or psychological objective is met, the neural and emotional systems are wired to redirect focus. In practical terms, this means that once a partner is secured, the unconscious calculations of novelty, compatibility, and advantage begin to reorient. This is the tragedy of possession. The very fulfillment of desire triggers the internal movement of attention away from what was once ardently sought. For women, this insight provides a profound opportunity for reflection. By understanding that desire and emotional investment are, in part, biological processes, one can begin to disentangle self-worth from external affirmation. The ache of shifting attention or diminishing intensity is not a reflection of inadequacy, but a reflection of natural rhythms. Schopenhauer's lens encourages a form of mindfulness, observing the impermanence of externally derived satisfaction without judgment, and recognizing the distinction between relational outcome and inner value. Picture a scenario where attention and admiration from a partner once flowed continuously, now tempered by routine or fading intensity. A woman aware of this subtle shift may initially experience uncertainty, anxiety, or longing. Yet, with reflective understanding, she recognizes that the external ebb does not diminish her intrinsic worth. The tragedy of possession is softened when interpreted through the lens of awareness. Attachment to outcomes must yield to recognition of enduring internal resources. Schopenhauer's philosophy reframes desire as a current to navigate rather than a permanent tether to hold. In practice, this understanding reshapes relational engagement. Women attuned to the dynamics of possession and emotional transfer may observe patterns without immediate reaction. They can ask, "Is my distress rooted in a shift in the other, or in my attachment to external validation?" This distinction cultivates autonomy and clarity. Schopenhauer reminds us that the transfer of desire is not malicious. It is biological and natural, a current of consciousness and instinct flowing beyond conscious control. By acknowledging this, women can redirect focus from external certainty to internal abundance. Internal abundance is cultivated in multiple dimensions: emotional, cognitive, and existential. Emotional richness arises from the recognition and acceptance of one's own capacity to feel, independent of external attention. Cognitive abundance emerges through reflection, understanding, and insight into the rhythms of desire and relational dynamics. Existential abundance is the awareness that fulfillment is not contingent upon external validation, but arises from alignment with personal values, principles, and authentic self-expression. Schopenhauer's perspective offers a roadmap. The tragedy of possession need not bind the self when internal plenitude is cultivated. Consider how this plays out in intimate relationships. The desire to hold or control a partner often stems from a lack of awareness of these natural currents. Attempts to enforce permanence in the face of shifting attention can generate tension, anxiety, and disconnection. Schopenhauer's insight reframes this impulse. The real power lies not in enforcing permanence externally, but in cultivating a stable internal reservoir of satisfaction and presence. The tragedy of possession becomes a teacher, guiding reflection on the impermanence of external outcomes and the constancy of internal resources. Women can also observe how this principle intersects with social and cultural conditioning. Society often valorizes possession as evidence of success, security, or love. The partner who stays, the admiration that persists, the attention that endures. Schopenhauer challenges these assumptions, suggesting that attachment to permanence is misaligned with the biological realities of human desire. By integrating this perspective, women can release the compulsion to measure self-worth against fluctuating external attention, thereby creating space for deeper self-alignment and authentic engagement. Imagine a quiet evening, the soft whir of a fan blending with the distant rhythm of the night. A woman reflects on her relational experiences, the excitement of new connection, the subtle fading of intensity, and the recurring patterns of attachment and longing. Awareness allows her to observe without reacting compulsively. She recognizes that emotional investment is a flow, not a possession. By cultivating mindfulness and presence, she learns to navigate these currents with grace, rather than attempting to control their movement. Schopenhauer's philosophy also illuminates the connection between desire and expectation. Possession often generates expectation, the anticipation that external conditions will remain fixed, that affection, attention, or validation will persist indefinitely. The inevitable shift in desire can thus feel like betrayal, even when it is simply the natural redirection of biological imperatives. Women who cultivate insight into these patterns can temper expectation with understanding, responding to relational shifts with equanimity rather than distress. In this light, transcendence emerges as a deliberate practice. Transcendence does not imply detachment or indifference. It is an intentional shift from dependence on external consistency to cultivation of internal plenitude. Emotional energy is redirected toward self-development, creative expression, and meaningful engagement, rather than fixation on the impermanence of external attention. Schopenhauer suggests that liberation lies in recognizing the limitations of control and the expansiveness of inner resources. Consider the subtle nuances of relational dynamics. The initial thrill of pursuit often carries an intensity that diminishes over time, yet the quality of connection can deepen through mutual respect, shared values, and conscious awareness. Women who perceive the tragedy of possession understand that the raw force of initial attraction is transient, but relational richness can endure when grounded in internal alignment rather than external fixation. This insight transforms perception. What once felt like loss is reframed as opportunity for self-mastery and growth. Internal abundance also enables women to respond rather than react. Emotional shifts in a partner are no longer triggers for anxiety or fear of abandonment, but signals to recalibrate attention toward self-directed fulfillment. Schopenhauer's observations highlight that desire and attention are dynamic, and that awareness of this dynamism allows women to maintain equanimity while engaging meaningfully in relationships. The tragedy of possession becomes a canvas for conscious choice rather than an arena of struggle. Practical strategies for embracing this perspective include mindfulness, journaling, and reflective dialogue. By tracking emotional responses, identifying patterns of attachment, and observing the natural ebb and flow of attention, women gain insight into their relational habits. Schopenhauer's philosophy encourages reflective detachment, observing the impermanence of external affirmation while cultivating constancy of internal resources. This practice fosters resilience, clarity, and the capacity for deliberate engagement. Furthermore, the transcendence of possession invites creative and personal exploration. Energy previously invested in securing permanence or controlling attention can be redirected toward pursuits that cultivate joy, competence, and self-expression. Schopenhauer reminds us that fulfillment is multifaceted. Internal satisfaction, intellectual curiosity, emotional richness, and relational depth collectively form a foundation independent of external validation. The tragedy of possession, once understood, becomes a springboard for expansive personal growth. Ultimately, women who integrate this understanding navigate relationships with freedom, presence, and authenticity. They recognize that emotional currents are natural, that desire flows and shifts, and that true power lies in internal abundance rather than external control. Schopenhauer's insights illuminate a path of reflection, acceptance, and conscious engagement. The tragedy of possession is transformed into an opportunity to cultivate inner wealth, resilience, and authentic connection. Through this lens, attachment is no longer a source of anxiety or struggle. The impermanence of attention becomes a mirror reflecting the constancy of self-alignment. Women learn to embrace relational dynamics with awareness, recognizing that fulfillment arises not from permanence imposed externally, but from the richness cultivated within. Schopenhauer's philosophy, far from deterministic, becomes liberating. By understanding the patterns of desire, attachment, and possession, women step into a domain of autonomy, inner abundance, and deliberate, meaningful engagement. In the quiet hush of night, when shadows stretch across walls and the faint hum of a fan accompanies your thoughts, consider a subtle truth about human dynamics, one that often escapes immediate notice. Schopenhauer observed that women possess an understated form of influence in relationships, a capacity to wield power not through overt dominance but through the nuanced interplay of perception, expectation, and emotional resonance. This influence, sometimes termed the power of perceived weakness, has been described by modern interpreters as the tyranny of the weak, or weakness as leverage. Understanding this phenomenon is not about manipulation or judgment. It is about clarity, awareness, and the potential for conscious empowerment. Imagine a softly lit room, a quiet conversation unfolding, where gestures, pauses, and subtle tones carry immense weight. A woman may appear delicate, yielding, or emotionally vulnerable. Yet beneath this apparent fragility lies a sophisticated attunement to social dynamics, an innate understanding of leverage that Schopenhauer would argue is deeply rooted in evolutionary and psychological mechanisms. The very perception of weakness can become a tool of influence. It invites protection, solicits attention, and subtly shapes the behavior of others, particularly those who seek approval, affection, or validation. Consider the relational patterns that emerge from this dynamic. Men, often conditioned to respond to perceived vulnerability with care, support, or intervention, may inadvertently grant authority to the one who appears dependent or fragile. Schopenhauer recognized this as a recurring motif. Women, aware or unaware of their relational influence, often operate within a framework where perceived weakness is a form of soft power. It is not coercion in the conventional sense. It is leverage exercised through the careful orchestration of attention, need, and emotional expression. This weakness as power is paradoxical. Society frequently valorizes strength, independence, and assertiveness, while simultaneously conditioning men to respond to vulnerability with protection or concession. Schopenhauer's insight reveals that women, by inhabiting spaces culturally coded as vulnerable or dependent, can exert influence disproportionate to the overt displays of authority. Awareness of this dynamic offers an opportunity for reflection. Understanding the mechanisms of influence allows for conscious choice and engagement, rather than reactive participation in unconscious power games. Imagine observing a scenario at a dinner table, where subtle social cues guide the ebb and flow of conversation. A slight hesitation, a softened tone, or a request framed with modest uncertainty can prompt heightened attentiveness from others. Schopenhauer would argue that these signals are not accidents. They are manifestations of relational intelligence, evolved to optimize social navigation and secure resources or attention. Yet, if unexamined, this dynamic can reinforce cycles of dependency, misunderstanding, or misaligned expectations. For women, the first step toward mastery is recognition. By observing how perceived weakness generates influence, they can distinguish between authentic expression and performative vulnerability. Schopenhauer's philosophy emphasizes that insight into human behavior is not about judgment but about self-awareness. Recognizing the potency of perceived fragility allows women to consciously calibrate their presence, to decide when and how to display vulnerability, and to ensure that influence is exercised from a place of integrity rather than subconscious compulsion. The concept of tyranny of the weak also has profound implications for relational ethics. Leverage derived from perceived vulnerability is a double-edged sword. It can guide relationships toward mutual care and attentiveness, but if wielded unconsciously, it can foster manipulation, resentment, or imbalance. Women attuned to this pattern learn to navigate these currents with deliberate intention. They discern when emotional expression serves authentic communication versus when it unintentionally creates dependency or asymmetry. Schopenhauer's perspective provides a philosophical lens. Power is not inherently good or bad. Its value is measured by conscious application and alignment with personal principles. Beyond interpersonal dynamics, this principle intersects with broader social and cultural structures. Historically, women often faced constraints on overt expressions of authority. In response, perceived weakness became a form of strategic agency, a way to secure resources, safety, or influence within rigid hierarchies. Schopenhauer's observations suggest that even in contemporary contexts, these patterns persist subtly, influencing negotiation, collaboration, and social positioning. Awareness of these dynamics empowers women to engage authentically while maintaining conscious control over relational influence. Consider the internal experience of mastering this power. Awareness transforms perceived vulnerability from a passive trait into an active tool. Women learn to inhabit their own presence fully, balancing openness with discernment, receptivity with agency. Emotional intelligence becomes intertwined with philosophical insight, the capacity to observe, interpret, and guide interactions consciously rather than reactively. Schopenhauer's lens suggests that this form of power is profoundly evolutionary, rooted in adaptive strategies for social navigation and personal security. Practical reflection on this concept involves several layers. First is the observation of relational patterns, noting when perceived weakness elicits responsiveness, attention, or support from others. Second is the calibration of emotional expression, choosing intentional moments for openness and receptivity rather than yielding to habitual displays. Third is the cultivation of inner strength, ensuring that the source of influence arises from integrity and self-alignment, not fear, insecurity, or coercion. This triad creates a balance where vulnerability serves as authentic leverage, not as a source of disempowerment. An illustrative scenario might be a collaborative workspace, where a woman's suggestions are initially overlooked. By framing ideas with measured vulnerability, acknowledging uncertainty while demonstrating knowledge and insight, she garners attention and consideration. Schopenhauer would interpret this as a manifestation of the subtle power inherent in perceived weakness. The combination of authenticity and strategic awareness produces relational influence without overt dominance. Yet, mastery requires careful reflection. The danger of unconsciously leaning on perceived weakness lies in reinforcing dependency or undervaluing one's own agency. Women must discern between leverage that enhances relational engagement and patterns that erode autonomy. Schopenhauer's insight emphasizes self-awareness. Understanding the psychological currents at play allows women to transform a potentially passive trait into an instrument of deliberate, ethical influence. Furthermore, the intersection of emotional resonance and leverage illuminates broader truths about human connection. The ability to read micro-expressions, subtle cues, and behavioral patterns, skills often more finely tuned in women, serves as both a shield and a conduit for influence. Schopenhauer noted that emotional perception is a form of power in itself. By attuning to shifts in mood, attention, and expectation, one can navigate social landscapes with grace, aligning actions with both personal integrity and relational responsiveness. The ultimate goal, however, is transformation rather than control. Women who understand the dynamics of perceived weakness are invited to transcend manipulation, consciously converting vulnerability into authentic strength. This entails integrating self-knowledge, ethical awareness, and emotional intelligence. Vulnerability becomes a tool for connection, presence, and alignment, rather than a lever for coercion or passive expectation. Schopenhauer's philosophy guides this transformation. Awareness and insight convert latent influence into deliberate, principled agency. Picture a woman walking along a softly lit street, her presence neither aggressive nor yielding, but fully aligned with her own principles. She interacts with others from a place of integrity, subtly exerting influence through authenticity, attentiveness, and emotional intelligence. The weakness she embodies is not an absence of power, but a refined expression of agency, fluid, adaptive, and profoundly effective. Schopenhauer's lens reveals that this is not paradoxical. It is the nuanced truth of human relational dynamics. Cultivating this form of strength also reshapes relational expectations. Women learn to observe without being swept away, to respond without overextending, and to engage without yielding autonomy. They recognize the difference between influence exercised consciously and dependence induced unconsciously. In doing so, they transform relational patterns from passive cycles of expectation into deliberate, meaningful exchanges grounded in awareness and respect. Finally, this understanding extends to self-empowerment. Recognizing the subtle mechanics of perceived weakness allows women to inhabit their full presence confidently. They can engage authentically, setting boundaries with clarity, communicating with integrity, and influencing relational dynamics in alignment with internal values. Schopenhauer's insights illuminate a profound truth. Power is not always visible, but when aligned with consciousness, vulnerability becomes one of the most potent instruments of agency and influence. By integrating these insights, women navigate social and relational landscapes with elegance and autonomy. The tyranny of the weak is transformed from an unconscious pattern into conscious strategy, allowing vulnerability to be expressed without compromise, influence to be exercised without coercion, and relationships to be engaged with clarity and presence. Schopenhauer's observations, far from cynical, offer a blueprint for self-mastery. Awareness of subtle power dynamics leads to ethical, authentic, and resilient engagement with the world. In the stillness of a quiet room, where the soft hum of a fan mingles with the distant rhythm of the night, one can begin to contemplate the nature of inner maturity, a transformation that is neither imposed by society nor defined by outward appearances, but cultivated from deep reflection and self-awareness. Schopenhauer observed that women, like men, often carry traces of what he described as childlike tendencies, a playful, impulsive, or reactive quality that persists beneath the veneer of social decorum. Yet these traits, while natural, are frequently misinterpreted, constrained, or redirected by societal expectation. The process of maturity, then, is not about erasing these qualities, but about integrating them with conscious understanding, philosophical insight, and intentional self-direction. Consider the paradoxical interplay between the childlike self and the cultivated adult. On the surface, social norms demand composure, restraint, and a measure of decorum, a set of behaviors collectively understood as being responsible or being mature. However, these externally imposed measures often mask the inner complexity of thought, emotion, and instinct. Schopenhauer suggests that beneath these social masks lies a natural vitality, a spontaneity, and a fluidity that, if suppressed without awareness, can lead to frustration, anxiety, or a sense of disconnection from the self. True maturity requires neither blind conformity nor reckless indulgence. It demands a careful integration of instinct, reflection, and conscious choice. Visualize a woman seated by a softly lit window, the night spilling shadows across her notebook. She writes not to perform for anyone but to trace the contours of her own thoughts. This act, seemingly simple, illustrates the essence of inner maturation, the willingness to observe oneself without judgment, to reflect upon impulses and reactions, and to discern between socially conditioned behaviors and authentic responses. In Schopenhauer's terms, this is the cultivation of a self that is conscious of its own drives, yet unbound by their automatic sway. At the heart of this transformation lies a philosophical depth that transcends surface appearances. While the world may evaluate women based on compliance, charm, or decorum, inner maturity is measured by clarity of mind, coherence of values, and the ability to navigate life's complexities with equanimity. Schopenhauer's critique of superficiality is instructive here. Childlike traits are neither inherently negative nor positive. They gain significance only when they are observed, understood, and harmonized with reflective insight. By turning attention inward, women cultivate a discernment that enables them to act from awareness rather than reflex, shaping lives aligned with purpose rather than expectation. Emotional intelligence is a critical component of this maturation. Recognizing one's feelings, understanding their origins, and modulating responses without repression or overindulgence allows for a nuanced engagement with the world. Schopenhauer emphasized the power of affective perception, the ability to detect subtle emotional currents, both within oneself and in others, is a cornerstone of relational competence. A mature inner life does not reject emotion. It engages with it consciously, transforming raw affect into deliberate action and reflective insight. The social environment often complicates this journey. Women are frequently confronted with conflicting expectations: to appear agreeable yet assertive, nurturing yet independent, spontaneous yet responsible. These tensions can create a sense of fragmentation, a struggle between internal inclinations and external pressures. Schopenhauer's observation that women retain traces of childlike spontaneity highlights the importance of reconciliation rather than suppression. Maturity emerges not from eradicating these impulses but from acknowledging them, understanding their origins, and integrating them into a coherent, self-directed framework. Imagine the interplay of these forces as a river flowing through varied terrain. The surface may ripple with social pressures, fleeting desires, or emotional turbulence, yet beneath lies a current of reflective depth and enduring values. The woman who cultivates inner maturity learns to navigate this river with discernment, channeling energy in ways that align instinct, emotion, and conscious intention. Each decision becomes an expression of integrated selfhood rather than a reaction to external expectations or internal compulsion. Reflection and philosophical inquiry are essential instruments in this process. By engaging with ideas that challenge assumptions, illuminate hidden biases, and probe the nature of desire, motivation, and agency, women develop the capacity to distinguish between transient impulses and enduring priorities. Schopenhauer's philosophical lens encourages skepticism toward surface appearances, prompting women to question habitual responses, societal prescriptions, and unexamined beliefs. This rigorous introspection fosters autonomy, self-trust, and clarity of purpose, the hallmarks of inner maturity. The cultivation of mental independence parallels the development of emotional sovereignty. Awareness of relational dynamics, recognition of subtle influence, and understanding of one's own cognitive and emotional patterns empower women to engage with others without surrendering autonomy. Schopenhauer's insights into desire, attention, and social interaction illuminate the mechanisms by which influence and attachment operate. By internalizing these insights, women transform potential vulnerability into conscious agency, exercising discernment in relationships without relinquishing authenticity or self-direction. Practical reflection includes cultivating habits that reinforce integration and self-awareness. Journaling, meditation, and contemplative practices enable observation of recurring thought patterns and emotional reactions. Engaging with philosophical texts, reflective dialogues, or mentorship provides context and perspective, fostering depth of understanding. Schopenhauer's emphasis on self-knowledge resonates here. Awareness of one's own drives and impulses is the foundation for deliberate, principled action. Through consistent reflection, women strengthen the bridge between instinctive spontaneity and considered choice, fostering resilience and adaptability. The transformation of inner maturity also entails redefining the concept of success and fulfillment. External validation, praise, recognition, or social approval, cannot substitute for the clarity, coherence, and stability that arise from self-alignment. Schopenhauer's observations encourage women to cultivate intrinsic measures of value, ethical integrity, intellectual engagement, emotional richness, and creative expression. These internal resources provide a steady foundation upon which authentic life choices can be made, independent of fluctuating external conditions. Consider the subtle rhythms of everyday life. Decision-making, conflict resolution, and interpersonal engagement all present opportunities to exercise reflective maturity. Each interaction becomes a space for conscious presence, listening with attention, responding with deliberation, and observing outcomes without attachment. Schopenhauer's lens reveals that maturity is not a static achievement but an ongoing process, a continuous harmonization of instinct, reflection, and intentional action. Inner maturity is also reflected in the capacity to embrace uncertainty and complexity. Life rarely conforms to predictable patterns, and relationships, ambitions, and personal growth are characterized by flux. Women who cultivate inner transformation navigate ambiguity with calm discernment, neither clinging rigidly to certainty nor surrendering to reactive impulse. Philosophical reflection, as Schopenhauer suggests, equips one with the tools to interpret patterns, anticipate shifts, and respond adaptively while maintaining coherence of self. Authenticity is the culmination of this process. As women reconcile their inherent spontaneity with reflective insight, they inhabit their own presence fully, engaging with the world from a place of integrity rather than performance. Social masks, roles, and expectations no longer dictate behavior. Instead, conscious awareness and self-trust guide engagement. Schopenhauer's critique of superficiality underscores that true maturity is inseparable from philosophical depth, self-reflection, and emotional intelligence. In practice, this means exercising agency in choices large and small, selecting relationships that align with values, pursuing endeavors that foster growth, and setting boundaries that respect both self and others. Emotional responses are acknowledged and channeled constructively, intellectual curiosity is sustained, and instincts are integrated with deliberate reflection. Each action reflects a synthesis of inner depth and practical wisdom, the hallmark of a mature, self-directed life. Finally, inner maturity nurtures resilience and freedom. By cultivating awareness of internal drives and external influences, women attain a sense of sovereignty over their lives. Schopenhauer's insights illuminate the mechanisms by which social expectation, habitual response, and instinctive impulse shape experience. By observing and integrating these forces consciously, women achieve a state of empowered equilibrium, where choices are made from alignment with the self rather than reaction to circumstance. The journey of inner transformation is ongoing, a slow and deliberate process akin to tending a quiet garden. Each reflection, each act of self-awareness, and each deliberate choice nourishes the roots of resilience, independence, and depth. Schopenhauer's philosophy provides a framework for understanding the interplay of instinct, emotion, and social dynamics, allowing women to cultivate a mature presence that is at once self-aware, authentic, and deeply aligned with inner truth. There's a quiet truth, often unspoken, that lingers beneath many relationships, beneath gestures of affection, shared glances, whispered promises. It's the kind of truth that only becomes visible when we stop romanticizing connection and start observing it clearly. Love, more often than we admit, is not unconditional. And perhaps more importantly, it's not supposed to be. Schopenhauer, with his stark clarity and often uncomfortable insight, suggested that what we call love is frequently a strategic transaction, one shaped by biology, social structures, and hidden motivations. In his view, especially when observing women, love was not simply the spontaneous overflow of emotion. but a careful, even unconscious, calculus of what is gained, secured, and preserved. Women, he observed, are more likely to engage in relationships where love is contingent on protection, status, provision, or security. Not because they are calculating or cold, but because evolution has conditioned them over centuries to love with foresight. It's easy to misread this as a criticism, but it isn't. It's a mirror. And when held gently, this mirror can reveal not only the nature of conditional love, but also the pathways to authentic self-protection, sovereignty, and conscious choice. Let's start with the most basic insight. All love has boundaries. The notion of unconditional love is beautiful in poetry, but in human relationships, especially in adult romantic ones, it can be dangerous if misunderstood. Boundaries are what allow love to flourish, not what restrict it. When a woman gives without boundary, offers herself without awareness of her own needs, or sacrifices her voice to preserve closeness, she isn't practicing love, she's enacting self-abandonment. From childhood, many women are socialized to believe that to be lovable is to be endlessly giving, to say yes, to forgive, to nurture without expecting reciprocation. And while compassion is a virtue, the invisible curriculum behind this socialization often trains women to ignore their own emotional costs. The result is a deeply rooted belief that their love must be unconditional, while unconsciously they are still measuring what they receive. This leads to inner conflict, quiet resentment, and a weakening of self-worth. Schopenhauer's observations were not about morality, but about pattern. He noticed that romantic relationships are often built not on unconditional devotion, but on perceived value exchange. This is especially evident in pairings where one partner provides resources, protection, or validation, and the other offers companionship, emotional intimacy, or social elevation. It's a system that has operated for millennia, not because individuals are manipulative, but because human beings evolved to seek security and connection. The key here is not to reject this reality but to understand it, and then decide what we want to do with it. Many women who feel betrayed or exhausted in love are not suffering because they gave too much, but because they gave under false pretenses. They gave believing their love was enough to change someone, or that loyalty would guarantee commitment, or that patience would be rewarded with transformation. But emotional investment is not a down payment on someone else's growth. And love, real love, cannot flourish when it's contingent on being chosen, rather than choosing yourself first. So how do we untangle this? How do we move from unconscious transactional patterns toward conscious, empowered connection? Step 1. Recognize the conditions that already exist. Every relationship carries unspoken rules. You may expect respect, fidelity, presence, shared values. These are conditions and they're necessary. The problem arises when women deny or suppress their own conditions for fear of being too much, too demanding, or hard to love. Ironically, it's often when these inner boundaries are ignored that relationships become brittle, and self-esteem begins to erode. Being clear about what you need is not a threat to love, it's what makes love sustainable. Step 2. Examine inherited scripts. Many of our beliefs about what love should look like were inherited, not chosen. They came from childhood models, cultural norms, or early experiences. Some women learned to equate love with approval, attention, or chaos. Some were taught to perform for affection. Others internalized that their worth depended on being needed. But the truth is, you do not need to be needed to be valuable. You do not need to prove your love through sacrifice. You are allowed to choose relationships that nourish you, not just ones you can survive. Step 3. Learn to sit with the discomfort of not being chosen. This is one of the most painful and liberating emotional initiations. When you start asserting boundaries, expressing needs, or choosing self-respect over approval, some people will leave. Some will call you selfish. Some will withdraw their love. And in those moments, it can feel like you've lost something vital. But what you've actually lost is a form of love that only existed as long as you abandoned yourself. Schopenhauer, in his relentless honesty, invites us to stop pretending, to acknowledge that conditional love is not weakness, it is reality. And it can be the foundation of healthy love, if those conditions are mutual, explicit, and respected. There is also something powerful in learning to observe the conditions under which you love others. What do you expect in return? Do you feel resentment when you give? Do you try to earn love by performing, fixing, or proving your worth? These patterns are not signs of failure. They are invitations for deeper self-inquiry. Modern psychology echoes much of Schopenhauer's sentiment, but through a more compassionate lens. Attachment theory, for example, suggests that we all carry emotional blueprints shaped by early relational experiences. Some people anxiously attach, fearing abandonment. Others avoid closeness altogether. In both cases, love becomes conditional, not because we are bad or broken, but because we are wired to seek safety. Understanding this can help women move from unconscious reactions to conscious relationships. It can help them set emotional contracts, agreements about how they want to give and receive love, how they want to navigate conflict, how they want to feel in partnership. Imagine the shift when a woman says, "I will love you fully, but not at the expense of my self-worth. I will be there for you, but I need reciprocity. I want to grow with you, but I will not shrink myself to fit into your comfort zone." These are not ultimatums. They are clarity. And clarity, while it may threaten fragile dynamics, is the doorway to genuine intimacy. At its most awakened level, conditional love becomes conscious love. It acknowledges needs. It honors truth. It allows two people to meet in the fullness of their humanity, rather than the shadows of their unmet wounds. This is the kind of love that doesn't demand perfection, but it does require presence. It doesn't guarantee permanence, but it does invite honesty. And most of all, it doesn't ask you to disappear in order to be loved. Women who embrace this understanding begin to reclaim their emotional economy. They stop overinvesting in people who only show up halfway. They stop negotiating their value in return for proximity. They stop seeing boundaries as barriers, and start seeing them as invitations to deeper respect, to clearer connection, to self-trust. It is not selfish to want a love that respects your complexity. It is not demanding to ask for what sustains you. It is not cold to walk away from dynamics that drain your spirit. It is mature. It is wise. And it is, perhaps, the most courageous kind of love. One that includes yourself in the equation. Remember, Schopenhauer's lens may seem cold, but it can also be clarifying. When we stop expecting love to save us, to complete us, to redeem our pain, we begin to see it more clearly. And in that clarity, we find the power to love not from emptiness, but from fullness. Not to earn worth, but to share it. Boundaries are not walls. They are the architecture of self-respect. And within them, true love, not fantasy, not performance, can begin to grow. There is a difference between not loving and not knowing how to love. The former is a conscious choice. The latter is a consequence of culture, of upbringing, of expectations so deeply ingrained that it becomes indistinguishable from self. Tonight, we look at the quiet tragedy that many women live through without naming, being conditioned into the performance of love, without ever being taught the essence of it. You are not born knowing how to love. Love is something you feel, yes, but also something you learn to give, to receive, to recognize, and to nurture. The problem is that most girls are taught from a very early age how to please, how to accommodate, how to be palatable. These lessons are disguised as love, but they are not love. They are scripts. They are strategies. They are defense mechanisms woven into the skin so early that you forget they were once foreign. What if what you call loving has always been a performance? What if the warmth you extend comes from fear of rejection, not from presence? What if your desire to be close is tied to your fear of being left behind? These questions are not meant to shake your foundation, but to reveal the false layers that were built atop it. You were not trained to love. You were trained to be needed, to be valuable, to be chosen. That is not the same thing. In fact, the two are often in conflict. From childhood, you are rewarded for compliance, for softening, for smiling through discomfort. You are praised for putting others first, for sharing, for being quiet when you're upset. When you cry too loudly, you're told it's too much. When you express anger, you're told to be nice. When you pull away to protect your boundaries, you're called cold or distant. Slowly, you learn a dangerous lesson. That love equals approval, and approval is conditional. So you adapt. You withhold your anger. You temper your needs. You say, "I'm fine," when you're not. You say yes when you want to scream no. You forgive too quickly, tolerate too much, and stay too long. And all the while, people tell you that you're good at loving. But inside, something feels hollow. Because it is. This isn't love. It's survival. Schopenhauer, as bleak as he often sounds, understood something about human nature that still unsettles people today. We confuse emotional tactics with emotional truth. He believed that much of what women express in relationships isn't rooted in genuine attachment, but in adaptive behaviors shaped by necessity. Not because women are incapable of love, but because they have been raised to weaponize affection as currency. Because society rarely teaches women how to love without first teaching them how to please. Modern psychology mirrors this in subtler language. Attachment theory, trauma studies, and interpersonal neuroscience all point to the same truth. People, especially women, often form emotional templates in response to what isn't safe more than what is. If vulnerability leads to punishment, they learn to conceal. If honesty leads to withdrawal, they learn to curate. If boundaries lead to abandonment, they learn to abandon themselves first just to stay close. So what we call love becomes layered with fear. It becomes a negotiation. It becomes a mirror of the same systems that taught you your worth is in how well you can disappear. How many women stay in relationships not because they are loved, but because they feel useful? How many apologize not because they were wrong, but because they are terrified of confrontation? How many pretend to be low maintenance because they were told their needs are too much? The pain is not just in the individual decisions. The pain is in realizing that you never knew there was another way. And yet, beneath all of this, beneath the scripts and survival tactics, there is still something alive. Something ancient. A part of you that knows what love is supposed to feel like, even if you've never tasted it clean. Even if you've only ever had it mixed with fear. It's the part of you that longs to be seen, not just valued. The part that wants to rest in someone's presence without negotiating your shape. The part that aches not to be useful but to be met. But that part? It has been silenced. Trained out of you. Muted under layers of performative kindness and preemptive self-erasure. And reclaiming it requires more than insight. It requires grief. You have to grieve the years you spent trying to earn what should have been offered freely. You have to grieve the connections that fell apart the moment you showed your real needs. You have to grieve the false safety of being needed over being loved. And grief, real grief, is messy. It's not poetic or dignified. It comes in waves, in confusion, in guilt. You may ask yourself, why didn't I see this sooner? Why did I betray myself so many times? Why did I call that love when it was control? But this grief is sacred. It is the door. It is the beginning. Because once you have grieved, you can begin to unlearn. Unlearning love as performance starts with radical honesty. Not with others, with yourself. You begin by noticing when you're acting. When you say, "I love you," but don't feel safe. When you offer support but secretly resent it. When you lean in not because you want to, but because you're afraid they'll pull away if you don't. This is where the untraining begins. You don't have to stop loving, but you do have to stop performing. The more you notice, the more you realize how much of your love was actually adaptation. And then you get to make a new choice. Not instantly, not all at once, but choice nonetheless. To speak when you would normally stay quiet. To rest when you would usually overextend. To say, this doesn't feel good, even if it risks disapproval. To stop chasing those who only love the version of you that serves them. These are the small revolutions. And they add up. Because the woman who begins to untrain herself from performative love starts to inhabit her own heart differently. She moves more slowly. She listens to the tension in her body. She questions the voice in her head that says, you'll lose them if you stop being perfect. She stops molding herself to fit. She lets herself be complex, contradictory, evolving. And slowly she stops needing to be needed. Because love is not usefulness. Love is not tolerance. Love is not earned through endurance. Real love, if it is to exist, must include your full self. Not the trimmed-down version. Not the agreeable shadow. But the whole thing. The rage, the softness, the desire, the fear, the wildness, the stillness. This is what was trained out of you. But it was never destroyed. It's still there. You are not broken. You are not too much. You are not incapable of love. You are simply learning to remember a truth that the world asked you to forget. You were born knowing how to love. You just learned to prioritize being loved over being yourself. And now, you can unlearn. You can return. It will take time. It will feel unfamiliar. You may lose people who only loved your compliance. You may spend nights questioning whether you're selfish, cold, hard to love. But stay the course. Because on the other side of that discomfort is something truer, something warmer. Not just love as feeling, but love as freedom. Freedom to choose connection without bargaining. Freedom to give without depletion. Freedom to receive without suspicion. Freedom to say, I will not shrink for you, not even in love. This is what you are remembering. This is what you are reclaiming. This is what love can be, when it is no longer shaped by training but by truth. There exists a quiet power that many women carry within them, often unrecognized, sometimes dismissed, but rarely fully appreciated. It is the ability to read the subtle currents beneath conversation, the invisible tides that sway relationships before a single word is spoken. Schopenhauer, ever observant of human behavior, noted that women have long wielded influence not through overt conquest, but through the nuanced orchestration of emotional reality. They do not merely react to the world, they sense its undercurrents, perceive its hidden pressures, and adapt with astonishing precision. This is not trickery, and it is not manipulation in its base sense. It is the evolutionary edge granted by millennia of survival in complex social landscapes. And tonight we will explore this edge, not to romanticize it, but to understand it, harness it, and respect it as a form of intelligence that is both ancient and profoundly practical. From an early age, women are socialized to notice details that are easily overlooked. The tilt of a head, the hesitation in a tone, the micro-expressions that flit across a face before the mind can consciously register them. These observations are not passive. They are deeply active processes of pattern recognition, emotional calibration, and instinctive hypothesis testing. When someone frowns subtly, they may sense dissatisfaction before a complaint is voiced. When a compliment is offered with slight stiffness, they may detect obligation rather than warmth. It is as though their nervous systems have been finely tuned to the emotional frequency of their surroundings, capable of reading signals that are invisible to the casual observer. In many ways, this sensitivity is a survival mechanism, an adaptive skill honed over countless generations when perceptiveness could mean the difference between social cohesion and alienation, protection and vulnerability. Consider how this manifests in daily life. A woman in a meeting may intuit the tension building between colleagues long before a debate escalates. A friend may sense unspoken distress in a loved one, responding with care that seems almost telepathic. A partner may subtly notice disinterest, frustration, or deceit in an interaction and adjust behavior accordingly. These abilities are not merely social tricks. They are reflections of an internal algorithm that scans, interprets, and predicts human behavior with uncanny accuracy. Schopenhauer described this as a form of power, a quiet yet undeniable leverage in relationships. While men may seek to assert control through action or logic, women frequently navigate influence through perception, shaping outcomes by understanding the hidden currents rather than confronting them head-on. Yet this power carries responsibility. Perceptiveness can be exhausting. The constant scanning of social and emotional cues places immense cognitive and emotional load on those who possess it. It is not a gift that can be deployed without awareness. Emotional intuition, if untempered, may lead to overinterpretation, unnecessary worry, or an unconscious manipulation of others. It is one thing to notice subtle cues. It is another to allow them to dictate reactions unreflectively. The skill lies in observation, not compulsion, in discernment, not domination. Recognizing patterns in behavior allows for insight, not control. Understanding the unspoken currents of social interaction can protect, empower, and guide decisions, but only when paired with conscious intention. Women who cultivate this faculty gain a unique advantage in interpersonal navigation. They can sense motives, anticipate conflicts, and make choices that align with both their values and their survival. They may discern when a person is trustworthy, when intentions are opaque, and when situations require detachment rather than engagement. This intuitive foresight operates alongside rational evaluation, combining emotional perception with reflective judgment to create a sophisticated internal compass. Schopenhauer would argue that this is not mere cunning. It is an evolutionary adaptation that increases agency, preserves resources, and enhances resilience in social ecosystems where subtle missteps can carry significant costs. The evolutionary origins of this intuition are clear when examined through a historical lens. In social groups where overt force was less accessible, understanding the dynamics of alliances, rivalries, and emotional landscapes was crucial. The ability to anticipate reactions, to interpret unspoken intentions, and to influence outcomes without confrontation allowed women to navigate complex social hierarchies, safeguard kin, and optimize access to resources. Over generations, these skills became embedded in cognitive patterns, neurological sensitivity, and behavioral strategies. What appears today as extraordinary empathy, foresight, or reading the room is, in fact, a legacy of survival mechanisms translated into the modern social sphere. Yet in contemporary society, the value of this skill extends beyond personal survival. It becomes a tool for empowerment, self-protection, and leadership. Women who recognize their intuitive strengths can leverage them in negotiation, collaboration, and emotional intelligence. They can detect dishonesty, manage conflicts before escalation, and create environments that honor authenticity rather than performance. Emotional intuition allows for anticipatory action, a preemptive adjustment to circumstances that preserves well-being while navigating complex social networks. It is not magic, it is applied cognition, evolved over millennia, refined in daily interactions, and accessible to those willing to practice awareness with care. Importantly, Schopenhauer's observations also caution against undervaluing or dismissing this capacity. Too often, cultural narratives frame emotional perceptiveness as oversensitivity or irrationality, particularly when exhibited by women. Such dismissals obscure the real function and adaptive value of these abilities. They are not mere feelings. They are informed insights, data points gathered through lived experience and keen observation. Recognizing and honoring this faculty allows for a more authentic engagement with oneself and with others, mitigating the risk of exploitation or misunderstanding. In practice, it becomes a guide, a way to navigate the world not through fear, reaction, or obligation but through informed choice. As with any powerful tool, ethical application is key. Emotional intuition can guide action in ways that protect and nurture, but it can also be misused. The ability to perceive vulnerabilities can tempt one to manipulate, to coerce subtly, or to assert influence in self-serving ways. Awareness and intentionality are therefore essential. Women who cultivate their perception must simultaneously cultivate reflection, grounding their observations in empathy, ethics, and conscious purpose. This balance transforms a reactive gift into proactive mastery, allowing intuition to serve the individual and the collective with clarity and integrity. Learning to trust and calibrate intuition requires practice. It begins with mindfulness, attending to internal responses without immediate judgment. It involves observing patterns in interpersonal dynamics, noting repeated emotional signals, and reflecting on outcomes. Journaling experiences, discussing perceptions with trusted confidants, and cross-checking intuitive insights against reality enhance accuracy and confidence. Over time, these practices strengthen discernment, reducing the noise of misinterpretation and amplifying the signal of meaningful insight. The result is a heightened capacity for emotional literacy, one that provides both self-protection and relational intelligence. For women, this evolutionary advantage is not about control over others. It is about mastery of self and environment. It allows for strategic engagement rather than reactive submission. It fosters clarity in relationships, enabling women to choose partnerships aligned with mutual respect and authentic connection. It informs decisions that prioritize long-term well-being, emotional stability, and personal growth. It is a lens through which social, professional, and personal landscapes can be navigated with insight, resilience, and discernment. This skill also intersects with other dimensions of personal development. Cultivating emotional intuition enhances communication, empathy, and conflict resolution. It strengthens leadership, negotiation, and mentoring capabilities. It deepens self-awareness, revealing patterns of thought, behavior, and emotional response. Schopenhauer might describe this as a form of strategic consciousness, where understanding the currents of human motivation allows one to act in ways that honor both personal integrity and social reality. It is a profound advantage, one that is often unrecognized but profoundly impactful when harnessed consciously. The ethical and practical integration of this intuition is a form of empowerment. Women who cultivate and trust their perception learn to navigate life with intentionality rather than fear, to engage with relationships thoughtfully rather than reactively, and to honor their boundaries while fostering authentic connection. It is a quiet revolution, the recognition that the ability to read and respond to subtle emotional signals is a strength, a learned skill, and an evolutionary gift, not a liability or a flaw. It transforms vulnerability into insight, observation into agency, and perception into wisdom. Ultimately, embracing this evolutionary edge allows women to reclaim autonomy, agency, and resilience. It provides a framework for understanding human behavior in nuanced and practical terms. It encourages self-trust, informed choice, and strategic engagement. It invites reflection, ethical application, and continual refinement. Schopenhauer's observations, often misinterpreted as cynical, reveal a subtle but profound truth. The human mind, and particularly the perceptive female mind, is capable of extraordinary insight when attuned to the hidden currents of social and emotional reality. Recognizing and applying this insight is not manipulation. It is mastery of self, of circumstance, and of the complex networks of human interaction that define our lives. Deception is often framed as a vice in modern moral discourse, yet from a biological and evolutionary perspective, it is more accurately understood as a survival skill. Schopenhauer, in his uncompromising study of human nature, observed that women possess a unique aptitude for strategic subtlety, a talent that has historically allowed them to navigate social, relational, and environmental complexities. What many call cunning or manipulative behavior is, in fact, a deeply ingrained adaptive mechanism that has ensured survival, influence, and agency in contexts where direct power was often inaccessible. Recognizing this instinct is not about assigning blame or valorizing deceit. It is about understanding the underlying architecture of behavior and learning to wield it with conscious intention rather than unconscious repetition. From early life, women are attuned to patterns, shifts in mood, and unspoken social rules. They are trained by both nature and culture to observe, interpret, and respond to subtleties in ways that maximize personal security and social advantage. A glance, a pause, the tone of a phrase, all become cues that inform decisions and guide behavior. In historical terms, a woman who could read hidden intentions, anticipate reactions, and modulate her own expression had a survival edge. She could protect herself from potential harm, maintain alliances, and negotiate resources without direct confrontation. Over generations, these capacities were encoded into cognitive and emotional patterns, manifesting today as an intuitive grasp of social dynamics, a keen sense for strategy, and a natural facility with perception that borders on the prescient. Schopenhauer highlighted that women's strategic subtlety is often misinterpreted as inherent deception. This misreading ignores the context in which these abilities evolved. The world has rarely been safe for those with little power. Openly asserting needs or confronting authority could lead to social marginalization, emotional trauma, or physical danger. Thus, women developed the ability to navigate these structures obliquely, using charm, persuasion, subtle manipulation, and emotional calibration to achieve outcomes that aligned with survival and long-term interests. This skill is not inherently harmful. It is, in essence, an ethical form of adaptive intelligence, a set of tools that allow one to operate effectively within complex social networks while protecting one's own agency. The instinct for deception is closely intertwined with the development of self-awareness. Acting without reflection often produces patterns of behavior that reinforce dependency, insecurity, or interpersonal tension. Many women find themselves repeating unconscious strategies learned in childhood or early socialization. Masking emotions, presenting socially acceptable versions of themselves, or yielding to unspoken expectations. These behaviors, while protective, can obscure authenticity and hinder self-realization. Recognizing the instinctive drive to conceal, modulate, or selectively disclose one's truth is therefore the first step in converting a survival skill into conscious empowerment. It allows women to differentiate between strategic self-protection and habitual, unconscious performance that no longer serves them. Reflection deepens this process. Women who pause to analyze their motivations, to question why they act in particular ways, and to examine the outcomes of these behaviors begin to reclaim authority over their instincts. Was this concealment necessary to avoid harm, or did it merely perpetuate old habits of seeking external approval? Is the choice serving self-respect, or is it a reaction to ingrained expectations? This discernment transforms natural aptitude into deliberate action. It is the difference between responding instinctively and acting intentionally, between being shaped by circumstances and shaping circumstances to align with one's values. Schopenhauer observed that this awareness, combined with skillful application, constitutes a subtle form of power, one that does not rely on coercion but on insight and strategic understanding. The practical applications of this conscious use of deception are manifold. In personal relationships, it allows women to maintain boundaries without creating unnecessary conflict. In professional settings, it enables strategic negotiation and the careful timing of disclosures. In social environments, it offers a framework for assessing trust, detecting hidden intentions, and making informed decisions about alliances and partnerships. This does not imply that women should employ deception maliciously. Rather, it is about recognizing the mechanisms at play and using them in ways that preserve autonomy, safety, and integrity. Deception becomes a tool for self-governance, a way to navigate the complexities of human interaction with discernment rather than impulse. Self-responsibility is inseparable from this process. Possessing a natural aptitude for subtle influence carries ethical obligations. Women must consider the consequences of their actions, the impact on others, and the alignment of their strategies with their values. When instinctive abilities are wielded without reflection, they can perpetuate harm, reinforce inequities, or create cycles of misunderstanding. When used consciously, they foster empowerment, clarity, and relational intelligence. Ethical application transforms an evolutionary survival mechanism into a disciplined practice of agency and insight, one that enhances both self-protection and social efficacy. Cultivating this awareness requires continuous practice. Mindfulness, observation, and reflection are critical. Women must learn to track their responses, identify patterns, and evaluate outcomes. Journaling experiences, analyzing emotional reactions, and considering the motivations behind both personal actions and the behaviors of others sharpen this skill. Over time, intuitive understanding becomes increasingly accurate, reducing the risk of misinterpretation and enhancing the ability to respond adaptively. This is not an innate perfection but a cultivated mastery, a refinement of natural instincts through conscious attention, reflection, and application. Moreover, understanding the instinct for deception extends beyond personal insight. It informs interpersonal comprehension. Women who recognize the mechanisms of selective disclosure, emotional modulation, and strategic concealment can better anticipate the behaviors of others. They can detect incongruities between speech and intention, understand hidden expectations, and respond to social signals with precision. This capability fosters emotional literacy, negotiation skills, and conflict management, providing a toolkit for navigating the often ambiguous and layered terrain of human relationships. Schopenhauer's reflections emphasize that this is not manipulation for exploitation. It is foresight grounded in self-knowledge and applied with ethical responsibility. Over time, the conscious integration of these instincts leads to a profound sense of autonomy. Women gain clarity in their interactions, choosing when to reveal, when to withhold, and when to assert themselves. They learn to engage with the world without being unduly influenced by unconscious habits, societal pressure, or the expectations of others. Strategic awareness transforms reactive patterns into intentional behavior, creating opportunities for authentic connection, boundary maintenance, and personal growth. The natural skill that once operated unconsciously becomes a deliberate, ethical instrument of empowerment, allowing women to navigate social dynamics with both grace and agency. Additionally, this approach reframes cultural narratives around female behavior. What is often mischaracterized as deceit, manipulation, or oversensitivity is recognized as adaptive intelligence, an evolved mechanism that equips women to thrive in complex social ecosystems. By understanding and reclaiming this instinct, women can challenge reductive stereotypes and assert the legitimacy of their emotional and cognitive capabilities. They cultivate a sense of self-trust that is informed by observation, reflection, and deliberate action, a counterpoint to narratives that diminish or pathologize perceptive and strategic behavior. The integration of self-responsibility and instinctive strategy also enhances emotional resilience. Women who consciously apply these skills can anticipate challenges, regulate responses, and make choices aligned with both safety and long-term well-being. The process is not about perfection or control but about informed engagement, recognizing patterns, evaluating context, and acting with intention. In this way, instinctive capacities for subtlety and deception, once viewed as liabilities, become instruments for navigating complexity, achieving self-protection, and fostering authentic relationships. Ultimately, embracing the instinct for deception with awareness and responsibility is an act of empowerment. It allows women to reclaim agency, establish and maintain boundaries, and navigate the relational world with insight and integrity. Schopenhauer's observations, often interpreted as cynical, in fact illuminate a deep truth. The human mind, particularly attuned to subtle social and emotional dynamics, is a tool of extraordinary capacity. When understood and consciously applied, the natural inclination toward strategic subtlety becomes not a flaw, but a refined skill, a means to safeguard autonomy, exercise judgment, and cultivate self-directed engagement in a world that is often unpredictable and demanding. By consciously transforming instinct into informed action, women can navigate life with clarity, ethical discernment, and profound personal agency, turning what was once an unconscious survival mechanism into a deliberate, empowering practice of self-mastery. The dynamics of attraction are far more intricate than popular culture and romantic storytelling often lead us to believe. Schopenhauer, in his penetrating analyses of human behavior, illuminated a counterintuitive pattern. Women are often drawn not to men who seek to be needed, but to men whose presence is complete and self-sufficient, whose value is inherent rather than derived from external dependence. This observation is unsettling to many, precisely because it confronts a cultural myth that equates love with utility, the idea that providing, rescuing, or fulfilling someone else's needs guarantees affection and attachment. Yet beneath the surface of social conventions lies a deeper psychological current, one that has significant implications for how women understand both attraction and their own sense of worth. Recognizing this current allows women to release the compulsion to be needed, to step into a luminous independence, and to engage in relationships from a place of inner wholeness rather than external validation. From an evolutionary perspective, this preference is not capricious but adaptive. Historically, women's choices in mates were influenced by traits signaling strength, competence, and stability, qualities that implied reliability, protection, and the ability to maintain resources. A man who was constantly seeking validation, overly dependent, or defined solely by what he could provide risked being perceived as insecure or insufficiently capable of sustaining long-term partnership. Conversely, a man whose confidence, presence, and competence were self-contained conveyed resilience, stability, and a kind of magnetic autonomy. The attraction to self-sufficiency is not an expression of vanity or cruelty. It is rooted in a subtle and deeply ingrained assessment of compatibility, resilience, and long-term survival. Psychologically, the pattern extends beyond evolutionary utility. Human beings are drawn to autonomy and agency because they reflect qualities we unconsciously value in ourselves and in our partners. Women are often drawn to men who exude confidence, presence, and purpose not because they seek to rescue or fulfill them, but because those qualities resonate with an inner recognition of strength. Schopenhauer noted that this form of attraction is less about external provisioning and more about alignment with a stable, self-directed energy, a silent signal of competence, emotional equilibrium, and capacity to navigate life's challenges. Women, therefore, are responding not to dependency but to completeness, to the magnetic force of an individual who is already full and grounded. For women, understanding this dynamic carries profound implications. Many are socialized to equate being desired with being needed. From early experiences, girls may internalize the notion that their value lies in providing care, attention, and validation to others, particularly men. Romantic narratives reinforce the idea that selflessness and sacrifice are pathways to love, and that dependence is a form of intimacy. Yet this framework obscures a critical truth. Being needed is not synonymous with being loved or respected. In fact, dependence often fosters dynamics where agency is ceded, boundaries are blurred, and authentic connection is compromised. Women who act primarily to be needed may find themselves trapped in cycles of expectation and emotional labor, rather than experiencing relationships grounded in mutual respect and attraction. Schopenhauer's observations illuminate an alternative approach, one that reframes attraction not as transactional dependence, but as resonance between autonomous individuals. Women who cultivate a sense of self-sufficiency and clarity in their own lives naturally draw partners who are equally complete, capable, and grounded. This does not mean creating emotional distance or disengaging from intimacy. Rather, it means establishing a foundation of internal fullness from which all relational engagement flows. Independence becomes a magnetic quality, a form of illumination that signals competence, confidence, and inner stability. When a woman no longer seeks to be needed, she frees herself from external pressures and gains the capacity to attract relationships based on genuine connection rather than obligation or utility. This principle extends into practical behaviors and mindset. Women who embrace their own autonomy make choices that prioritize self-respect and personal development. They cultivate interests, skills, and emotional resilience that are independent of external validation. They approach relationships from a place of curiosity and compatibility, rather than from a desire to fill voids or meet expectations. This perspective encourages discernment. Not all attention or affection is equally valuable, and not every relationship serves growth or alignment with inner values. By internalizing that being wanted is more meaningful than being needed, women can engage in partnerships that enhance rather than diminish their sense of self. Understanding the allure of independence also requires examining social and emotional patterns. Women may notice an instinctive pull toward partners who are distant, self-contained, or seemingly unaffected by their efforts to provide care or approval. Schopenhauer described this as a reflection of unconscious attraction to strength and wholeness. The paradox is that the less a partner relies on a woman for validation, the more their authentic engagement emerges. In this dynamic, women are not manipulating or withdrawing for effect. They are responding to a fundamental truth of human relational psychology. Completeness attracts completeness, and autonomy fosters genuine resonance. Recognizing this allows women to disentangle emotional responses from learned dependence, cultivating awareness of what truly ignites connection. Another aspect of this pattern involves the interplay of desire and respect. Dependence often engenders a sense of control, yet it does not engender authentic attraction or admiration. Women who release the compulsion to be needed disrupt cycles where affection is contingent upon service or sacrifice. Instead, they cultivate presence, self-possession, and clarity of purpose, qualities that elicit engagement on terms of respect, choice, and mutual attraction. In this sense, independence is not isolation. It is an ethical and psychological positioning that honors both one's own needs and the integrity of relational exchange. Cultivating this form of self-sufficient allure requires attention to both internal and external life. Internally, women develop clarity regarding values, boundaries, and desires. They nurture self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and resilience, understanding that their own worth is intrinsic rather than contingent on external validation. Externally, they engage with the world in ways that reflect competence, purpose, and grounded presence. This combination of inner stability and outward alignment signals authenticity and maturity, qualities that are inherently attractive and that naturally draw partners who mirror these attributes. Schopenhauer's observations also highlight the transformative power of this understanding on relationship dynamics. Women who embrace autonomy disrupt traditional narratives of dependence and codependency, fostering connections that are cooperative rather than transactional. They recognize that attraction rooted in need creates imbalances, whereas attraction rooted in wholeness promotes equality, respect, and sustainable engagement. By shifting the focus from being needed to being complete, women reclaim agency, preserve integrity, and invite partners who are capable of engaging on a shared plane of authenticity. This approach has implications beyond romantic engagement. It shapes friendships, professional interactions, and broader social dynamics. Autonomy and completeness become a guiding principle for discerning engagement, allowing women to invest energy where it is reciprocated, respected, and aligned with values. It cultivates a posture of self-respect and discernment, enhancing emotional resilience and reducing vulnerability to manipulation or coercion. Independence, in this sense, is not merely a personal quality, it is a strategic orientation for navigating the social world with wisdom and clarity. Ultimately, embracing the allure of independence is about liberation from the compulsion to be needed. It is a conscious choice to cultivate self-sufficiency, clarity, and inner illumination, allowing attraction and connection to emerge naturally and authentically. Women who internalize this truth radiate a magnetic presence not because they seek to compel others, but because they embody completeness, confidence, and purpose. Schopenhauer's insights reveal a timeless reality. The most profound connections arise not from dependence or obligation, but from the resonance of fully realized individuals who engage from a place of authenticity, self-possession, and mutual respect. By stepping into this light, women can redefine relational dynamics, cultivate independence, and experience the transformative power of being genuinely seen, valued, and drawn to for who they are, not for what they provide. Human relationships are intricate webs of perception, emotion, and social negotiation. Schopenhauer's observations shed light on a subtle, often overlooked dynamic: the ways in which women have historically harnessed the perception of vulnerability as a tool for influence. This is not about malicious manipulation or moral judgment. Rather, it is an acknowledgement of a nuanced evolutionary strategy that has developed as a response to imbalances in social power. When physical, social, or economic power is unevenly distributed, the ability to leverage perceived weakness becomes a form of agency, a method to navigate the currents of attention, protection, and resources without resorting to direct confrontation. Understanding this dynamic allows women to distinguish between authentic vulnerability and strategic display, and to transform what might seem like a liability into a source of empowerment and relational insight. At its core, vulnerability functions as a signal. Human beings are wired to respond to cues of fragility, need, or dependency. From an evolutionary standpoint, responding to signs of vulnerability encouraged caregiving, resource allocation, and the maintenance of social bonds that enhanced survival. Women, who historically had less overt access to power structures dominated by men, learned to modulate these signals with extraordinary precision. A slight hesitation, a measured expression of uncertainty, or a controlled display of emotional need could elicit attention, assistance, or protection. This skill was not accidental. It was honed over generations as a form of subtle negotiation, a way to influence outcomes while maintaining dignity and safety in contexts where direct assertion might be risky or counterproductive. Schopenhauer observed that this dynamic is deeply intertwined with the social construction of gender roles. Cultural expectations often equate femininity with delicacy, sensitivity, and dependence, reinforcing the perception that women are inherently weaker or more fragile. Yet within these externally imposed roles, women develop strategies to exercise agency and influence through the careful modulation of perceived vulnerability. The apparent paradox, that displaying weakness can generate strength, reveals the sophistication of adaptive social intelligence. It demonstrates that power does not always manifest through force or dominance. Sometimes, it arises from strategic subtlety, perception, and relational calibration. Recognizing the mechanics of this dynamic is essential for self-awareness and empowerment. Women must first differentiate between genuine emotional states and performative vulnerability shaped by societal expectation or strategic calculation. Authentic vulnerability is a natural expression of need, fear, or openness, a part of human experience that fosters connection, empathy, and trust. Performative vulnerability, by contrast, is consciously or unconsciously deployed to influence behavior, gain attention, or test responses. The challenge lies in navigating the intersection of these dimensions, expressing authentic emotion while retaining discernment over its social and relational consequences. When understood and applied consciously, perceived vulnerability becomes a potent tool for empowerment rather than a trap. It allows women to set boundaries, negotiate relational dynamics, and cultivate influence without compromising authenticity. For instance, in interpersonal relationships, signaling a measured need or uncertainty can create space for dialogue, elicit support, or encourage collaboration. In professional contexts, demonstrating openness to feedback or asking for guidance strategically can foster trust, build alliances, and enhance credibility. The key is intentionality, leveraging perception as a form of communication and agency, rather than reacting unconsciously to external expectations or internalized patterns of dependency. The concept of vulnerability as a form of power also intersects with emotional intelligence. Women who are attuned to the nuances of social perception can read responses to signals of need, calibrate their expressions, and anticipate the effects of their actions. This does not equate to manipulation in a pejorative sense. Rather, it reflects a sophisticated awareness of cause and effect in social interaction. The ability to sense when, how, and to what extent to reveal or conceal aspects of emotional experience fosters autonomy, resilience, and strategic relational insight. Schopenhauer's perspective underscores that this capacity is not merely a learned social skill. It is rooted in cognitive and emotional architecture that has evolved to navigate complexity with finesse. Understanding the dynamics of vulnerability also encourages critical reflection on societal expectations. Women are often socialized to prioritize compliance, accommodation, and relational maintenance, sometimes at the expense of their own agency. In such environments, apparent fragility can function as a shield, a way to negotiate space and protect personal interests within systems that may not otherwise recognize their authority. Recognizing this pattern allows women to reclaim the power inherent in perception and choice, transforming vulnerability from a source of external imposition into a conscious, self-directed instrument of influence. Developing this skill requires self-knowledge and emotional literacy. Women must cultivate awareness of their own emotional landscapes, including fears, desires, and relational impulses. Journaling, reflection, and mindfulness practices enhance the ability to distinguish between authentic emotional expression and performative signaling. Over time, this discernment enables women to deploy vulnerability strategically, fostering authentic connection while maintaining autonomy. They learn to recognize when openness will cultivate trust, when measured restraint is appropriate, and how to balance transparency with self-protection. The result is a refined capacity to engage with others in ways that are both authentic and empowered. This understanding also reshapes perceptions of relational power. Traditional frameworks often equate influence with dominance, assertiveness, or control. Yet Schopenhauer's insight reveals that subtlety, perception, and relational intelligence constitute equally potent forms of power. The deliberate use of vulnerability exemplifies this principle. A woman who communicates her needs, boundaries, and uncertainties with clarity and intentionality wields influence not by coercion but through relational resonance. She invites cooperation, elicits empathy, and shapes interactions in ways that honor both her autonomy and the agency of others. Moreover, consciously navigating vulnerability transforms emotional experience itself. When women understand the mechanisms and effects of their own displays, they reduce anxiety, uncertainty, and reactive behavior. Emotional energy that might previously have been expended in unconscious signaling or compliance can be redirected toward self-expression, creativity, and personal growth. This cultivates a sense of internal coherence, aligning intention, behavior, and impact. Schopenhauer's reflections suggest that the interplay of perception and influence, when harnessed thoughtfully, fosters both relational efficacy and psychological resilience. This process is not about perfection or constant control. Genuine emotion remains a vital aspect of human life, and strategic awareness does not negate the richness of vulnerability or empathy. Rather, it offers a framework for integrating instinct, perception, and ethical agency. Women learn to honor their authentic feelings while discerning how these expressions function in relational contexts. They navigate the tension between openness and protection with grace, recognizing that the power of vulnerability lies in its thoughtful, conscious deployment rather than in unconscious habit or societal imposition. Ultimately, the mastery of vulnerability as a source of power fosters a transformative sense of agency. Women can engage with relationships from a place of conscious authority, expressing needs, setting boundaries, and cultivating connection without sacrificing authenticity. Schopenhauer's insights, often viewed as cynical or critical, illuminate the potential for strategic subtlety to coexist with emotional integrity. By understanding the mechanics of perceived weakness and refining their capacity to wield it ethically, women transform what was once a reactive survival mechanism into a deliberate, empowering practice. Vulnerability ceases to be a constraint or liability. It becomes a medium for clarity, influence, and self-directed engagement in the complex landscape of human relationships. This integration of insight, reflection, and deliberate action creates a foundation for relational wisdom. Women who navigate vulnerability with awareness cultivate respect, authenticity, and resilience. They engage with others from a position of strength tempered by empathy, leveraging perception not as a means of manipulation, but as a conduit for ethical influence and self-protection. In doing so, they illuminate the subtle truths Schopenhauer observed, that power is not solely a matter of dominance, but also of perception, awareness, and the conscious application of relational intelligence. By mastering the interplay of authentic vulnerability and strategic subtlety, women step into a form of empowerment that is profound, nuanced, and enduring, transforming both themselves and the relationships they inhabit. A life of genuine fulfillment begins not with external validation but with an inward journey, a deliberate cultivation of presence, clarity, and autonomy. Schopenhauer's philosophy underscores a fundamental truth. Happiness is not bestowed by circumstances or other people. It emerges from the mastery of one's own mind, desires, and actions. For women, this insight carries profound implications. Society often frames fulfillment in relational or external terms. Success is measured by approval, affection, or the maintenance of expectations imposed by others. Yet when attention is shifted inward, when the locus of authority and satisfaction resides within oneself, a new paradigm of empowerment and richness emerges. This is the genesis of a self-directed, flourishing life, an inner empire built not upon fleeting validation but upon enduring capacities, economic agency, philosophical insight, and physical mastery. The cultivation of economic independence forms a cornerstone of self-mastery. Financial autonomy is more than a practical necessity. It is an existential enabler, a tangible expression of control over one's environment and choices. Women who understand and exercise this agency are no longer beholden to the whims, approval, or provision of others. Money, in this sense, becomes a tool for self-determination, allowing women to navigate life with freedom, confidence, and strategic discretion. This empowerment transforms relational dynamics as well. Partnerships are no longer defined by dependency or transactional exchange but by mutual choice and respect. Economic sovereignty, when paired with self-awareness, signals to the world that one's presence is rooted in self-possession rather than necessity. Philosophical depth is the next dimension of a flourishing inner life. Schopenhauer himself engaged with life through the lens of contemplative observation, urging individuals to understand the underlying structures of desire, motivation, and attachment. Women who cultivate philosophical reflection develop the ability to perceive patterns in thought, emotion, and behavior, not only in themselves but in the social landscapes they navigate. This discernment provides clarity in decision-making, allowing for choices aligned with long-term values rather than fleeting impulses. It also fosters resilience. When life presents challenges or relational complexities, a grounded mind interprets them as phenomena to engage with wisely rather than threats that provoke reactive anxiety. Through contemplation, women attain a form of cognitive sovereignty, where thought and insight are instruments of self-guided living. Physical mastery complements economic and philosophical cultivation, embodying the principle that self-mastery is holistic. Awareness and care of the body enhance confidence, vitality, and presence. Practices that strengthen, condition, and attune the body cultivate a sense of control that translates directly into mental and emotional domains. Physical empowerment is not about perfection or appearance. It is about the experiential assurance that one can move through the world with agency, resilience, and grace. The body becomes a reliable instrument of autonomy, a platform upon which decisions, actions, and engagements are enacted with integrity and deliberate intent. Strength, endurance, and bodily attunement foster an inner alignment that amplifies all other dimensions of self-directed flourishing. Integral to this inner empire is the understanding of relational dynamics through the lens of autonomy. Women who anchor their fulfillment in themselves navigate partnerships and social connections with clarity and confidence. They recognize that attachment should be a complement to, not a substitute for, self-mastery. Emotional dependency on others diminishes the ability to make autonomous decisions. Conversely, self-possession fosters attraction, respect, and relational reciprocity. By asserting boundaries, articulating desires, and honoring their own priorities, women create a relational ecosystem in which interactions are balanced, intentional, and aligned with their intrinsic values. Schopenhauer's observations remind us that autonomy in thought, action, and emotion is magnetic. It commands respect and invites engagement on terms of mutual authenticity rather than obligation or expectation. The pursuit of self-conquest also entails the mastery of desire and impulse. Human beings are constantly influenced by fleeting cravings, social pressures, and conditioned responses. Women who develop awareness of these currents cultivate the ability to observe impulses without being driven by them, to reflect before acting, and to choose in alignment with long-term objectives. This capacity transforms internal experience. Frustration, envy or anxiety lose their dominion over thought and behavior, replaced by deliberate engagement, creative expression, and purposeful action. Desire is no longer a tyrant but a guide, a signal to be interpreted rather than an uncontrollable force. The cultivation of this internal governance is foundational to the flourishing life Schopenhauer envisioned, a life led by insight, intentionality, and agency. Equally vital is the integration of creativity and self-expression. Flourishing is not merely survival or function. It is the manifestation of inner richness in the external world. Women who develop their inner capacities, economically, philosophically, physically, have the foundation upon which to build expressions of art, intellect, and relational engagement. Creative pursuits, intellectual exploration, and meaningful projects allow the inner empire to expand outward, providing satisfaction that is self-sustaining rather than contingent on approval. In this manner, flourishing becomes both an internal state and an external manifestation, reinforcing confidence, autonomy, and resilience through tangible achievements and expressive fulfillment. Schopenhauer's insights also highlight the necessity of discernment in attention and energy allocation. Women who seek external validation or attempt to control outcomes through others inevitably dilute their power and diminish their inner coherence. By focusing on self-conquest, they optimize the use of time, effort, and emotional energy. Every decision, interaction, and commitment is filtered through an internal framework of values, capability, and long-term vision. This filtering process amplifies efficacy, fosters meaningful relationships, and ensures that energy is invested in pursuits that genuinely contribute to autonomy, growth, and satisfaction. In this sense, the inner empire is not static. It is a dynamic system of priorities, skills, and engagements that collectively constitute a life of purpose and richness. Cultivating this life also requires the capacity to confront uncertainty and discomfort. Schopenhauer acknowledged the inevitability of suffering and the unpredictability of circumstances. Women who internalize self-mastery embrace these realities not with fear or avoidance, but with strategic resilience. Challenges, setbacks, and relational complexities become instruments of growth, opportunities to refine judgment, expand insight, and strengthen internal resources. This mindset transforms adversity from a threat into a mechanism for empowerment, reinforcing the self-directed framework upon which the flourishing life is constructed. The cumulative effect of these practices, economic autonomy, philosophical depth, physical mastery, emotional intelligence, and strategic engagement, creates a form of wealth that is profound, durable, and self-sustaining. Happiness and fulfillment emerge not as rewards from external sources but as byproducts of consistent internal cultivation. Women who inhabit this space of mastery radiate confidence, independence, and resilience. They are capable of forming deep, meaningful connections that enhance rather than define them, interacting with the world from a place of sovereignty and grounded presence. This self-contained richness is magnetic. It attracts alignment, respect, and genuine reciprocity while insulating against the volatility of dependence or external approval. In this framework, the flourishing life is ultimately an exercise in self-sovereignty. It requires intentionality, reflection, and sustained effort. It asks women to claim agency over resources, thoughts, emotions, and actions. It encourages the development of skills, insight, and strength across multiple dimensions of existence. Most importantly, it reframes fulfillment. Happiness is not a function of others' perception or approval, but an emergent property of internal coherence, competence, and purpose. Schopenhauer's philosophy thus transforms from abstract observation into practical guidance, revealing the path by which women may construct lives of richness, autonomy, and enduring meaning. As the journey of self-mastery unfolds, women learn to integrate all aspects of existence into a cohesive, self-directed life. Economic capacity allows freedom of choice and security. Philosophical reflection provides insight, clarity, and resilience. Physical awareness empowers presence and agency. Emotional literacy and relational discernment foster authentic connection and strategic engagement. Together, these dimensions form an inner empire that is self-sustaining, adaptive, and profoundly fulfilling. The flourishing life is no longer contingent upon circumstances, the approval of others, or the fulfillment of external expectations. It is rooted in the cultivated capacities, wisdom, and sovereignty of the self. This culmination of self-conquest is not an endpoint but a continuous process. Mastery of the self is ongoing, a lifelong engagement with one's mind, body, and spirit. Challenges, desires, and relationships are not distractions from this path but integral components of its practice. By embracing autonomy, insight, and intentionality, women construct a life that is rich, resilient, and deeply meaningful. The inner empire becomes a source of illumination, strength, and fulfillment, a domain in which happiness, agency, and purpose coexist harmoniously. Schopenhauer's observations, once perceived as stark or critical, are revealed as a guide to empowerment, a roadmap for cultivating independence, insight, and enduring contentment in a world that often measures worth externally. As we draw the exploration to a gentle close, let us slow the pace of thought and allow the mind to soften into the rhythm of presence. The complexities we have navigated, the subtle currents of attraction, the layers of emotional influence, the intricate balance of vulnerability and agency, are not meant to burden but to illuminate. They are signposts, guiding toward a deeper understanding of oneself, of the ways in which we navigate desire, connection, and personal power. Imagine the night settling around you, the quiet hum of a fan mingling with the faint rustle of leaves outside, each sound a reminder of the world's gentle constancy, even as your thoughts trace the intricate patterns of your own inner landscape. The wisdom we have engaged with tonight, drawn from Schopenhauer and interpreted through the lens of modern reflection, is not prescriptive but invitational. It does not dictate behavior or define worth. Instead, it offers insight into the forces, biological, emotional, social, that subtly shape experience. Recognizing these currents is an act of liberation. To observe the pull of desire, the sway of emotion, the allure of power without judgment, is to reclaim autonomy. It is to see clearly, to step back from the unconscious momentum that can steer life, and to choose intentionally where attention, energy, and affection flow. There is a quiet majesty in this clarity, a profound freedom that emerges when one learns to inhabit one's own agency fully. As you breathe and let awareness settle like a soft blanket over the mind, consider the notion that self-mastery is not about perfection. It is not a rigid imposition of control over every impulse or emotion. Rather, it is a tender cultivation of harmony within the self, a balance between insight and feeling, strength and softness, action and reflection. The inner empire we have discussed is not a fortress of detachment, but a sanctuary of understanding, where choices are informed by depth and presence rather than by external expectation or fleeting compulsion. It is a space where one can feel fully alive, fully engaged, and yet gently untethered from the pressures of needing to perform, please, or conform. Let the awareness of your own capacity for resilience, insight, and growth fill the spaces between thoughts. Each pause, each breath, each quiet moment is a reminder that the essence of a flourishing life lies not in outcomes or validation, but in the steady cultivation of the self. This cultivation is patient, iterative, and intimate. It unfolds in small acts, in noticing a feeling without judgment, in asserting a boundary, in choosing engagement over reaction, in nurturing curiosity about oneself and the world. Over time, These acts accumulate into a subtle, enduring power, a richness that is not dependent on others, but radiates from within, quietly shaping experience and relationships. Consider, too, the gentle paradox of vulnerability and strength we have explored. To inhabit the self fully is to recognize both fragility and potency as integral elements of being. There is grace in acknowledging uncertainty, compassion in attending to one's needs, and courage in expressing authenticity. By embracing this duality, life becomes a canvas of depth rather than a battleground of perfection. The power of discernment, the ability to recognize when to yield, when to assert, when to observe, emerges naturally from such integration. It is neither aggressive nor reactive. It is simply aware, responsive, and alive to the moment. As night deepens, allow the reflections of this journey to settle softly, like dew on leaves or moonlight on still water. You may notice thoughts of past interactions, choices, or desires arising. Observe them as passing currents, without clinging or resistance. Within this space the mind finds ease. The body too can surrender, shoulders relax, muscles soften, breath lengthens. Each exhalation carries away tension, each inhalation invites clarity. In these moments, the wisdom of the inner empire becomes tangible. A sense of completeness, a recognition that fulfillment is already accessible, that the seeds of agency, insight, and autonomy exist within, ready to be nurtured gently, patiently, lovingly. The journey we have undertaken is both expansive and intimate. It traverses centuries of thought, biological and psychological insight, and the subtleties of social and emotional navigation. Yet, at its heart, it is a personal journey. The currents we have observed externally are reflections of internal landscapes, and the greatest transformation occurs within. There is no rush, no final destination beyond the quiet cultivation of presence and awareness. Each moment of reflection, each exercise of discernment, each act of deliberate choice is a step in the ongoing process of self-conquest. A process that, paradoxically, allows life to unfold with both grace and fullness. Let your attention now drift gently to the sensations of your environment. The softness of your seat or bed, the faint whisper of air, the rhythm of your heartbeat. These are anchors, subtle reminders of existence, of continuity, and of the enduring capacity within you to navigate life with clarity and intention. Schopenhauer's insights, refracted through reflection and introspection, remind us that power, influence, and satisfaction are not found in the manipulation or approval of others, but in the conscious cultivation of the self. By observing, understanding, and integrating these truths, one experiences a life that is profound not in its achievements alone, but in its depth, intentionality, and integrity. Now, as your mind softens and your breath deepens, allow a sense of quiet gratitude to emerge, for your own presence, your capacity to reflect, your willingness to engage with the inner landscapes of thought and feeling. Each layer of awareness you cultivate strengthens the inner empire, a domain of resilience, clarity, and authentic power. This is the essence of the flourishing life, a life that is rich, self-directed, and deeply fulfilling. As sleep approaches, let these reflections linger as gentle companions, subtle guides that accompany you into rest, offering reassurance, insight, and serenity. May the stillness of night cradle you, may the subtle hum of awareness keep you company, and may the knowledge of your own inner capacity provide comfort and strength. In this quiet space, allow yourself to release the need for external validation, the pressure of expectation, and the restlessness of unexamined impulse. Trust in the steady, patient unfolding of your own self-mastery. With each breath, you are rooted, you are capable, you are whole. Let this be a moment of surrender to presence, a moment of gentle reflection, and a threshold into rest. Sleep now, softly, fully, with the quiet knowledge that the richness of your life, the strength of your inner empire, and the clarity of your insight are always within reach. May your dreams be gentle, restorative, and imbued with the subtle wisdom you have cultivated tonight. This is the final invitation. Rest in yourself, rest in your mastery, and awaken renewed, guided by the luminous presence of your own intentional, flourishing life.